Liam's consciousness returned in a violent surge, his body jerking upright as if pulled by invisible strings. Cold stone pressed against his back, rough and uneven. He gasped, the air tasting of damp earth and something metallic, like rust and ozone mixed together. His eyes snapped open to a world of muted grays and greens. He lay in what appeared to be the corner of a ruined structure. Crumbling stone walls rose around him, barely reaching chest height in most places, with gaps where entire sections had collapsed. Through those gaps, he could see a landscape shrouded in shifting, pearl-gray mist that clung to the ground like a living thing. The mist moved with unnatural purpose, tendrils curling and uncurling as if tasting the air. Liam pushed himself up, his hands scraping against the rough stone. He wore the same clothes he'd had on before, jeans, a faded t-shirt, and work boots. His tool belt was gone. No phone, no wallet, nothing. Just the clothes on his back and the pounding headache behind his eyes. Distant screams cut through the silence. They weren't human screams of pain or fear, not exactly. They were something worse. The raw, tearing sound of something breaking that shouldn't break. Liam froze, his breath catching in his throat. The screams came from multiple directions, some closer than others, all swallowed by the ever-present mist. A voice spoke directly into his mind, clear and cold as polished steel. "Welcome to Domain Royale." The words carried no emotion, no inflection. They simply were. "You have been selected as player number 8472. The rules are simple: survive. The safe zone shrinks daily. The mist beyond is lethal. Territory expansion is permitted through magical manifestation. Combat is encouraged but not required. Your unique cheat ability has been granted based on your previous life's expertise." Liam's mind raced. Domain Royale? Death game? He'd read stories like this, watched movies, played games. But this wasn't a screen. The cold stone beneath him was real. The metallic taste in the air was real. The distant screams were horrifyingly real. Your cheat, the Blueprint of Conquest. Information flooded his consciousness, not words, but concepts. He could visualize structures. He could manifest them using magical energy. The structures would expand his personal territory. Territory pushed back the mist. More territory meant more safety. Initial magical energy allocated. Use it wisely. The first safe zone contraction occurs in 23 hours. The voice faded, leaving only the silence and the mist and the occasional, terrible scream. Liam stood slowly, his legs unsteady. He looked around the ruined structure. It might have been a hut once, or a storage building. The roof was completely gone, leaving only 4 partial walls forming a rough rectangle about 4 meters by 3. One wall had collapsed entirely, creating a wide opening to the mist-shrouded world beyond. Through that opening, he saw movement. Figures ran through the mist, silhouettes distorted by the swirling gray. Some chased others. Metal clashed against metal, the sharp, ringing sound of blades meeting. A burst of orange light flashed somewhere to the east, followed by a scream that cut off abruptly. Liam's engineering mind kicked in, pushing past the panic. Assess the situation. Identify resources. Formulate a plan. He had no weapons. No allies. No knowledge of this place beyond the system's brief explanation. But he had the Blueprint of Conquest. He focused on the ruined hut. Immediately, a translucent overlay appeared in his vision, hovering over the existing structure. Blue lines traced possible reinforcements, thicker walls here, a proper roof there, a sealed doorway instead of the gaping opening. The lines shimmered with a soft, azure light only he could see. Liam studied the blueprint. The system provided cost estimates in a unit he instinctively understood as magical energy. Reinforcing all 4 walls to proper thickness would consume about 40% of his initial allocation. Adding a basic wooden roof would take another 30. Sealing the doorway with a proper door and frame, 20. That left 10%. Not enough for anything substantial. He needed to prioritize. The mist was the immediate threat. According to the system, it was lethal. But his territory, this ruined hut, already provided some protection. The blueprint showed the current territory boundary as a faint golden line tracing the outer edges of the crumbling walls. Where the wall had collapsed, the territory line stopped, leaving that side exposed. If he sealed that opening, the territory would become a complete zone. The blueprint indicated complete zones provided better mist resistance. Liam made his decision. He would reinforce the 3 standing walls lightly, just enough to stabilize them. Then he'd seal the collapsed opening with a proper wall and door. The roof could wait. Shelter from above was less critical than shelter from the mist and whatever moved within it. He focused on the blueprint, selecting the reinforcement option for the 3 standing walls. The cost shimmered, 15%. Confirm manifestation. Liam took a deep breath. Yes. The magical energy left him in a rush, like water draining from a basin. He felt it go, a physical sensation of something vital being drawn out through his chest. At the same time, the stone walls began to change. Cracks sealed themselves. Stones shifted and locked together more tightly. The mortar between them glowed briefly with that same azure light before fading, leaving behind stronger, more solid walls. The process was silent except for the faint grinding of stone on stone. When it finished, the 3 walls stood straighter, thicker, more reliable. Liam reached out and touched one. The stone felt warmer than before, and the surface was smoother, as if worn by time rather than shattered by violence. Next, the collapsed opening. He focused on the blueprint again, selecting the option for a complete wall with a reinforced wooden door. The cost, 25%. More than he'd estimated. The system was adjusting based on available materials. The ruined hut had some scattered timber nearby, but not enough for a proper door. The blueprint must be creating materials from magical energy, which increased the cost. Liam hesitated. This would leave him with only 60% of his initial energy remaining. But an open flank was unacceptable. In any defensive structure, perimeter integrity came first. Confirm, he whispered. The energy drain was sharper this time, almost painful. Liam's vision swam for a moment as the magical energy flowed out of him. Before his eyes, the collapsed section of wall began to rebuild itself. Stones rose from the ground, stacking themselves in neat rows. Mortar flowed between them like liquid silver before hardening. A wooden frame formed in the center of the new wall, and within it, a solid oak door took shape, complete with iron hinges and a simple latch. The door swung inward slightly, revealing the interior of the now enclosed hut. The territory line completed itself, forming a perfect golden rectangle around the structure. As it did, something changed. The mist, which had been creeping toward the open side of the hut, stopped. It didn't retreat, exactly, but it ceased its advance. At the very edges of the new territory line, the mist seemed to thin, becoming more translucent, less substantial. The area within the hut felt clearer, the air easier to breathe. Liam stepped inside through the new door, pulling it closed behind him. The latch clicked into place with satisfying solidity. For the first time since awakening, he was in a fully enclosed space. He leaned against the door, breathing heavily. The magical energy expenditure had taken a toll. He felt drained, not just physically, but mentally. Using the Blueprint of Conquest required intense concentration, visualizing every detail of the structure. But he had shelter. Basic, crude, but shelter. He examined the hut more carefully. The floor was packed earth, uneven in places. The reinforced walls rose about 2.5 meters, with no windows. The missing roof meant he could still see the sky, a featureless gray expanse that offered no hint of sun or stars. The interior measured roughly 3 meters by 4, enough space to move around, but not much more. Liam sat against the wall opposite the door, sliding down until he was on the ground. He needed to think. He was a civil engineer. 32 years old. He'd been inspecting a bridge retrofit project when, what? He couldn't remember. There'd been a sound, a vibration, then nothing until awakening here. Now he was in a death game. With magical powers. Expected to survive against Mist and other players. Other players. The screams echoed in his memory. How many had died already? How many were out there right now, fighting, killing, trying to survive? Liam looked at his hands. They were the hands of an engineer, calloused from tools, stained with concrete dust that never quite washed out. These weren't killers' hands. They built things. They repaired things. They made structures that lasted. The Blueprint of Conquest shimmered at the edge of his consciousness, waiting to be used again. He could feel his magical energy slowly replenishing, a trickle, like a leaky faucet. Maybe 1% per hour. He'd need to test that. He stood and walked to the center of the hut, looking up at the open roof. That was the next vulnerability. Rain, creatures, anything could come in from above. But a roof would cost energy he didn't have yet. First, he needed to understand his territory better. Focusing on the blueprint, he willed it to show him more information about the hut. New details appeared: structural integrity, 85%. Mist resistance, low but functional. Territory radius, exactly matching the hut's dimensions. No expansion beyond the walls. To expand, he'd need to build outward. More structures. More walls. More territory. But that would draw attention. The system had said territory expansion was permitted. Other players would see it. Some might come to take it. Liam returned to the door, pressing his ear against the wood. The screams had mostly stopped. Now there were other sounds: footsteps crunching on gravel, distant shouts, the occasional metallic clang. The death game was proceeding all around him. Hours passed. Liam stayed in the hut, conserving energy, watching the sky through the open roof. The gray never changed. No day, no night, just perpetual twilight. But eventually, the light did begin to fade, shifting from gray to deeper gray, then to charcoal, then to near black. Night was coming. He'd need to decide about the roof. Without it, he was exposed. But using the last of his energy on a roof meant he'd have nothing left for emergencies. As he debated, a new sound reached him. Footsteps. Close. Multiple sets, moving carefully, deliberately. Not running. Not fighting. Stalking. Liam froze, his breath catching. He crept to the door, peering through a narrow crack between the wood and the frame. Outside, the mist had thickened with the fading light. It swirled in eddies and currents, glowing faintly with a sickly green phosphorescence. And within that glow, shapes moved. 3 figures. Maybe 4. They kept to the shadows between larger ruins, their forms blurred by the mist. But Liam could see their eyes. Glowing. Yellow-green. Like animal eyes caught in torchlight, but wrong somehow. Too bright. Too intelligent. They were moving toward his hut. One stopped, head tilting as if listening. Another gestured, a sharp, cutting motion with one hand. They spread out, flanking positions. Professional. Coordinated. These weren't panicked survivors. These were hunters. Liam backed away from the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had no weapons. His magical energy was still below half. The hut was defensible, but not impregnable. If they had tools or weapons, they could break down the door eventually. He looked up at the open roof. An idea formed, dangerous, desperate, but possibly his only option. The blueprint shimmered in his mind. He could visualize a temporary barrier across part of the roof. Not a full roof, just enough to create a defensible position. It would cost energy, maybe all he had left. But if they got inside, energy wouldn't matter anyway. Outside, the footsteps grew closer. He could hear breathing now, rasping, eager. Something scraped against the outer wall of the hut, near the door. Liam made his choice. He focused on the blueprint, selecting the cheapest possible overhead cover, a wooden platform across one corner of the hut, raised high enough that he could stand beneath it. A makeshift fighting position. Cost, 40% of his current energy. He'd be left with almost nothing. Confirm, he whispered. The energy left him in a cold wave. Above, wooden planks materialized, forming a rough platform in the corner furthest from the door. They weren't pretty, uneven, roughly hewn, but they were solid. They created a low ceiling about 2 meters high, with just enough space for him to crouch beneath. As the platform finished forming, the first blow landed against the door. Thud. The wood shuddered. The iron latch held, but barely. Another blow. Then another. Liam scrambled beneath the platform, pressing himself into the corner. Through the still open sections of roof, he could see the glowing eyes getting closer. Shadows moved against the darkening sky. A voice spoke from outside, raspy and deep. "Little builder. We know you're in there. Come out, and we'll make it quick." Liam didn't answer. He didn't move. The pounding on the door intensified. Something metal struck wood, an axe. A sword. Splinters flew from the door's surface. The latch began to bend. Liam watched, his mind racing through options, through calculations, through blueprints for traps and barriers he didn't have the energy to build. The glowing eyes gathered at the door, waiting for it to give way. In the deepening dark, with the mist swirling thicker than ever, Liam understood his first night in Domain Royale was just beginning. The pounding on the door had ceased hours ago, but Liam remained crouched on his makeshift wooden platform, muscles coiled tight. Dawn's first grey light filtered through the gaps in his reinforced walls, revealing the interior of his stone hut in stark relief. The air smelled of damp earth and his own sweat, a metallic tang of fear still lingering from the night. His magical energy had replenished to about 60% while he waited, a slow trickle that felt like blood returning to a sleeping limb. He'd spent the dark hours listening, his civil engineer's mind running calculations. The figures outside had eventually moved on, their footsteps fading into the distance, but he knew they'd be back. In a death game, resources were everything, and his reinforced hut stood out like a beacon in this ruined landscape. He'd counted 3 distinct voices during the night, 2 male, 1 female, all rough with desperation. As the light grew, Liam carefully lowered himself from the platform. His joints protested, stiff from hours of immobility. The wooden structure he'd manifested last night was crude but functional, giving him a vantage point and some overhead protection. He touched the reinforced door, feeling the solidity of the stone he'd shaped with his power. The blueprint of conquest hummed in his mind, a constant presence like a second set of eyes that could see not what was, but what could be. He was visualizing the groundwater table beneath his feet, layers of soil, gravel, then water-bearing strata, when the voices returned. "Open up. We know you're in there." A man's voice, raspy and aggressive. Liam froze, his breath catching. Through a narrow crack between stones, he saw 3 figures standing outside. Dawn's pale light revealed them clearly now, 2 men and a woman, all wearing scavenged leather and cloth armor stained with dirt and what looked like dried blood. They carried crude weapons, a rusted sword, a wooden club studded with nails, and a hunting knife. The woman held the knife, her eyes darting nervously between the hut and the surrounding ruins. "Last chance," the larger man barked. He was broad-shouldered, with a matted beard and eyes that held no mercy. "We saw you building last night. That takes energy. You've got supplies or you wouldn't waste power on walls." Liam's mind raced. The blueprint of conquest showed him options, defensive structures he could manifest, but each required energy and materials. He had stones from the collapsed wall section piled inside, maybe 30 pounds worth. His magical energy sat at 62% according to his internal sense. The system interface that had announced the death game rules yesterday remained silent, but he could feel the territory boundary around his hut, a subtle pressure pushing back the ever-present lethal mist that hung like a grey curtain 50 feet away. "We'll break it down," the second man shouted, hefting his nail-studded club. He was younger, leaner, with a wild look in his eyes. 3 against 1, builder. Your choice. Liam made his decision. He wouldn't open the door. Wouldn't negotiate with people who approached with weapons drawn at dawn. His engineering training had taught him about force vectors, load distribution, structural weaknesses. But more importantly, it had taught him about preparation and leveraging advantages. He focused on the area just outside his door. The blueprint of conquest superimposed a grid over his vision. He needed something fast, something that would use available materials. The stones. The energy. A spike trap, simple, brutal, effective. He visualized it, a pit 6 inches deep, sharpened stone spikes angled upward, concealed by a thin layer of dirt and debris. The design snapped into place in his mind, complete with energy cost estimates. 28% of his current magical reserve. Now, the bearded leader roared. All 3 rushed the door simultaneously. The woman hung back slightly, but the 2 men threw their shoulders against the reinforced stone with grunts of effort. Liam unleashed the power. Magical energy flowed from him like water from a broken dam. The stones he'd piled inside glowed faintly blue, then dissolved into shimmering particles that streamed through the cracks in the door. Outside, the ground churned. Earth buckled and shifted with a low rumble. The attackers stumbled back, eyes wide with shock. "What the younger man began. The ground beneath their feet gave way. Not completely, just a shallow depression, but from it erupted 6 sharp stone spikes, each a foot long, honed to wicked points. They emerged at angles designed to catch legs, feet, anything that stepped into the zone. The bearded leader reacted fastest, leaping backward. The woman screamed and scrambled away. But the younger man with the club wasn't so lucky. His forward momentum carried him right into the trap. A spike ripped through his left calf, emerging bloody and glistening in the dawn light. Another caught his right foot, pinning it to the ground. His scream tore through the morning silence. Blood sprayed, dark and arterial. The man collapsed, dropping his club, hands clutching at his ruined leg. The spike through his foot held him fast, like an insect pinned to a board. He thrashed, but every movement tore flesh further. "Yarrick," the woman screamed. The bearded leader stared at the trap, then at the hut, then at his bleeding companion. His eyes held pure terror now. "Cheat user," he whispered, then louder, "he's a fucking cheat user." Liam watched through the crack, his stomach churning. The blood was brighter than he'd expected. The screams more human. This wasn't a structural failure calculation or a safety simulation. This was flesh and bone and pain. The Blueprint of Conquest showed him the trap's efficiency, 83% optimal placement given available materials and energy expenditure. It coldly noted that the spike through the calf had severed the posterior tibial artery. Survival time without medical intervention, 4 to 7 minutes. "Get him out," the woman begged, but she didn't approach the trap zone. The bearded leader made a decision. His eyes darted from his dying companion to the hut to the surrounding ruins. He backed away, step by step. "We're leaving. We can't leave Yarrick. He's dead already. You want to join him?" The leader turned and ran, disappearing between two collapsed buildings. The woman hesitated for one agonizing second, her eyes meeting Liam's through the crack in the door. He saw her desperation, her fear, the knife trembling in her hand. Then she too turned and fled, leaving her companion to bleed out on Liam's doorstep. Silence returned, broken only by Jarrek's weakening moans. The blood formed a dark pool around the spikes, soaking into the dry earth. The lethal mist seemed to pulse at the edge of Liam's territory, as if smelling the carnage. Liam waited 5 minutes, until the moans stopped. Until the only sound was the distant cry of some scavenger bird. Then, carefully, he unbarred his door and stepped outside. The morning air was cool on his face. The spike trap looked smaller in daylight than it had in his imagination. Yarrick lay twisted at impossible angles, eyes open and vacant. The blood had stopped flowing. Liam's hands shook as he approached. He made himself look. Made himself see what he'd done. The man had been maybe 25. His clothes were patched and worn. His face, in death, looked younger than it had in life. "First blood," Liam whispered to himself. The phrase tasted like ash. But survival demanded pragmatism. He knelt, avoiding the blood pool, and checked the body. A small leather pouch contained 3 strips of dried meat and a handful of wild berries. Another held flint and steel. The man's water skin was half full. Liam took it all, his movements methodical, detached. The rusted sword lay nearby, he left it. The weight would slow him down, and he had no training with blades. He returned to his hut with the supplies, then used the last of his morning energy, another 8%, to dissolve the spike trap. The stones returned to loose rubble, and Jarrek's body slumped to the ground, free at last. Liam dragged it 20 feet beyond his territory boundary, into the mist zone. He didn't watch as the grey tendrils began to curl around the corpse. Back inside, he barred the door again and sat with his back against the wall. The looted supplies lay before him. Not much, but it was something. His magical energy now stood at 34%, dangerously low. The encounter had cost him more than he'd anticipated, not just energy, but something deeper. For an hour, he simply breathed, letting the adrenaline fade. Then his engineer's mind reasserted itself. Water. He needed a sustainable water source. The water skin wouldn't last 2 days, and the system announcement yesterday had been clear, the safe zone would shrink again at sunset. He had maybe 12 hours. He closed his eyes and reached for the Blueprint of Conquest. This time, he focused downward, through the floor, into the earth. The power responded differently now, not with violent manifestation, but with gentle perception. It showed him layers, topsoil, clay, gravel, then, there. An aquifer. Groundwater flowing maybe 15 feet down, clean and cold. A well. Simple in concept, complex in execution without machinery. But he wasn't using machinery. He was using magic shaped by engineering principles. He visualized it, a shaft 3 feet in diameter, lined with interlocking stones to prevent collapse, descending to the water table. A pulley system at the top. A cover to prevent contamination. The design unfolded in his mind, elegant and efficient. Energy cost, 40% of his current reserve if he used nearby stones. Too much. He'd be left with almost nothing. But water was life. Without it, territory expansion meant nothing. Without it, he'd be dead in 3 days, mist or no mist. He modified the design. Smaller shaft. 2 feet diameter. Shallower, maybe the water table was higher than he'd first estimated. He focused the power, probing deeper. Yes, there was a fissure in the rock layer at 12 feet. Water seeped through it. Not a gushing spring, but a steady trickle. Enough. The revised blueprint settled in his mind. Energy cost, 22%. Liam stood, gathered every loose stone in the hut, and piled them near the center of the floor. Then he placed his hands on the ground and unleashed the power again. This time, there was no violence. The earth simply opened. Not with a rumble, but with a soft sigh, as if the ground was exhaling. Stones dissolved into blue particles and flowed downward, forming a perfect cylindrical shaft. Liam watched through his power's vision as the shaft descended foot by foot, the stones aligning themselves with geometric precision, each layer supporting the one above. At 12 feet, they hit water. Cool, clear groundwater welled up, filling the bottom 3 feet of the shaft. The stones formed a final lining, then the manifestation ceased. The well stood complete in the center of his hut. A simple rope and bucket lay coiled beside it, manifested from leftover energy. Liam lowered the bucket, heard the splash, drew it up dripping. The water was cold and tasted of minerals and deep earth. Clean. Potable. As he drank, he felt his territory expand. Not dramatically, just a few feet in all directions, but he felt it. The boundary pushed against the lethal mist, forcing it back. The safe zone around his hut grew slightly larger. The Blueprint of Conquest confirmed it, territory radius increased by 4.2%. Water source established. Sustainability score, 78%. He allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. First blood was done. First foundation was laid. He had water, shelter, and a defensive structure that had proven effective. He was building something real in this nightmare. Then the system notification flashed across his vision, bright and urgent. Territory alert. Your expansion has been detected by Warlord Kale, who controls the eastern sector. The words hung in the air, glowing with malevolent light. Then they faded, leaving only their implication behind. Liam stared at the well, at the water still dripping from the bucket, at the reinforced walls that suddenly felt very thin indeed. Somewhere to the east, someone powerful had just taken notice of him. And in the Domain Royale death game, attention was usually followed by violence. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ruined landscape, painting the jagged stones in hues of amber and rust. Liam stood by the newly manifested well, his fingers tracing the smooth stone rim as he assessed his territory. The water system had expanded his safe zone, pushing back the ever-present lethal mist by another few feet. He could feel the subtle hum of magical energy replenishing within him, slow, like a trickle of water through cracked earth. After yesterday's confrontation with the attackers and the system's warning about Warlord Kale, every resource felt precious. He knelt, dipping a cupped hand into the cool groundwater. The water was clear, free of the mist's sickly green tinge that clung to the air beyond his borders. Drinking deeply, he felt the energy within him stabilize at around 15%, a faint warmth spreading through his limbs. His inventory, the dried meat, berries, flint and steel, and half-full water skin looted from Yarrick, lay neatly stacked against the hut's reinforced wall. The spike trap he'd manifested yesterday still stood, its stones stained dark with dried blood, a grim reminder of the cost of survival. As Liam turned to inspect the perimeter, a movement caught his eye. Beyond the territory's edge, where the mist began to thicken into a swirling curtain, a figure stumbled into view. It was a woman, her clothes ragged and stained, her face gaunt with hunger. She moved with the hesitant steps of someone who had been running too long, her eyes darting nervously between the mist and Liam's fortified hut. She stopped just outside the territory line, her breath coming in ragged gasps that fogged in the chill air. "Please," she called out, her voice hoarse. "I saw the well. I saw what you built. I need shelter." Liam remained still, his engineer's mind already calculating risks. The woman, Mara, as he would later learn, looked harmless enough, but in this death game, appearances were deceptive. Her hands were empty of weapons, but they trembled with exhaustion. The mist behind her seemed to pulse, as if sensing her vulnerability. "I have nothing to offer but information," Mara continued, her eyes pleading. I know things about this sector. About the warlords. Let me in, and I'll tell you everything. Liam considered. His magical energy was low, but not critically so. The hut was secure, but isolated. Information could be as valuable as water here. He took a step forward, stopping at the edge of his territory. The mist recoiled slightly, repelled by the invisible boundary of his power. What's your name? He asked, his voice steady. Mara, she said, wrapping her arms around herself. I've been scavenging since the game started. I saw your territory expand yesterday, the system alerted everyone. You're a builder, aren't you? Liam nodded slowly. Come in, but stay by the well. Don't approach the hut. Mara stumbled across the boundary, collapsing to her knees as the mist's pressure lifted. She breathed deeply, color returning to her pale cheeks. Liam watched her carefully, noting how she avoided looking at the spike trap, her eyes instead fixed on the well with something like reverence. Thank you, she whispered. The water. I haven't had clean water in days. Liam fetched the water skin from his inventory, filling it from the well and handing it to her. Mara drank greedily, water spilling down her chin. When she finished, she looked up, her eyes clearer now. You need to know about Warlord Kale, she said, her voice gaining strength. He controls the eastern sector. He's been hunting builders, anyone who tries to expand territory. He sees it as a threat to his control. Yesterday, when your expansion triggered the system alert, he declared war. He's gathering forces. Liam felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The system's warning had been vague, but Mara's words made it real. How many? He asked. Dozens, Mara said. Maybe more. He recruits survivors by force, promising protection from the mist. But his protection comes at a price, you fight for him, or you die. I escaped 3 days ago. Been hiding since. She paused, her gaze drifting to the reinforced walls of Liam's hut. You built all this alone. With that, power. The Blueprint of Conquest, Liam said, not elaborating further. He needed to think. A perimeter wall, that was the next logical step. But with his energy low and a warlord mobilizing, time was scarce. He looked at Mara, really looked at her. She was thin, but her eyes held a sharp intelligence. A scavenger would know the terrain, the resources, the hidden dangers. I can offer you shelter, Liam said finally. But not for free. I need materials, stone, wood, anything that can be used for construction. And I need you to scout. Watch for Kale's movements. Mara nodded eagerly. I can do that. I know where to find materials. There's a collapsed watchtower to the north, old stone that might still be usable. And fallen trees near the western ridge. Liam considered his energy reserves. A storage shed, something simple, functional. He visualized it in his mind, a small, rectangular structure with a sloped roof, just large enough to organize supplies and provide Mara with basic shelter separate from his hut. Using the Blueprint of Conquest, he felt the design crystallize, the magical energy required calculating itself. With efficient, minimalist design, thinner walls, no unnecessary embellishments, it would cost less. Maybe 8% of his current energy. He focused, extending his hands. The air shimmered, and stone and timber seemed to coalesce from the ground itself, stacking and fitting together with silent precision. The shed took shape near the well, its door facing the hut for easy oversight. As the last stone settled, Liam felt the energy drain, precisely 8%, leaving him at around 7%. The territory didn't expand this time, the shed was too small to push back the mist significantly, but it solidified his hold on the existing space. Mara stared, her mouth slightly open. I've never seen it done so cleanly, she murmured. Most builders waste energy on flashy structures that collapse in days. Civil engineering, Liam said simply. Form follows function. This is your shelter. In return, start gathering materials. Prioritize stone for a perimeter wall. I'll design it tonight. Mara stood, testing her legs. I'll head to the watchtower first. It's close, and the stone should be easy to carry in small loads. She hesitated. What about Kale? If I see his scouts. Report immediately. Don't engage. Liam's tone left no room for argument. Your value is in information, not combat. Mara nodded, a grim determination settling over her features. She spent the next hour resting by the well, eating some of the dried berries from Liam's inventory. As the sun climbed higher, she set out, moving with a scavenger's cautious grace along the territory's edge before disappearing into the mist-shrouded landscape. Liam spent the afternoon planning. With a stick, he drew rough diagrams in the dirt, a perimeter wall, 10 feet high, with reinforced sections at potential attack points. He calculated the energy cost, too high for his current reserves, but if Mara brought enough materials, he could reduce it by using physical resources as a base, overlaying them with magical reinforcement. It was a stopgap, but it might buy time. His thoughts drifted to the death game's rules. The safe zone would shrink again tonight, the mist creeping inward, forcing players closer together or into territory-expanding conflicts. His well had given him a buffer, but Kale's aggression changed everything. This wasn't just survival anymore, it was a race against an enemy who understood the stakes. As evening approached, Mara returned, her arms laden with chunks of weathered stone. She made 3 more trips before dusk, each time reporting no sign of Kale's forces. Liam organized the materials near the shed, his mind already adjusting the wall design to incorporate the stone. The work was slow, methodical, a contrast to the violent chaos that defined the Domain Royale. When the last light faded, Mara climbed the small hill at the territory's northern edge, a vantage point that offered a view of the eastern plains. Liam joined her, his eyes scanning the darkening horizon. For a long moment, there was only the whisper of the wind and the distant, ever-present groan of the mist. Then Mara pointed, her finger trembling slightly. There. In the distance, beyond the rolling hills, pinpricks of light flickered to life, dozens of campfires, arranged in a rough semicircle. Even from here, Liam could make out the shadows of armed figures moving between them, the glint of weapons catching the firelight. The campfires seemed to pulse in the gathering dark, a constellation of threat against the night sky. Kale's main force, Mara whispered. They're mobilizing. Faster than I thought. Liam said nothing, his mind already racing through defensive permutations, energy calculations, structural weaknesses. The campfires looked like eyes in the dark, watching, waiting. The hilltop wind felt colder now, carrying the faint scent of smoke and something else, the metallic tang of impending conflict. The sun dipped below the jagged horizon, casting long shadows across Liam's territory. The air grew thick with the chill of encroaching dusk, and the ever-present lethal mist began its nightly advance, a shimmering grey wall of death that crept inward from the edges of the safe zone. Liam stood at the boundary of his land, where the mist halted a few feet away, repelled by the invisible energy of his territory. He could feel the subtle hum of the Blueprint of Conquest, a low vibration in his bones that marked the limits of his control. Beside him, Mara shifted nervously, her eyes scanning the dimming plains. It's too quiet, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustle of dry grass in the evening breeze. Liam nodded, his mind already racing through calculations. The ruined village he'd claimed was a patchwork of stone foundations and overgrown paths, with his reinforced hut and the new well standing as lonely sentinels. The storage shed Mara had helped fill with scavenged materials, mostly weathered timber and loose stones from the collapsed watchtower, sat nearby, a modest stockpile for his ambitions. He glanced at his hands, feeling the faint tingle of magical energy that had replenished to around 20% since morning. It wasn't enough for anything grand, but it might suffice for what he anticipated. The mist pushes back about 10 feet from the edge of our territory, he muttered, more to himself than to Mara. If Kale's people are smart, they'll test that boundary first. As if on cue, movement flickered at the edge of his vision. 3 figures emerged from the gathering gloom, silhouetted against the fading light. They moved with a predatory grace, keeping low to the ground, their forms blurred by the mist that swirled around them. Liam recognized them as scouts, not the brutish attackers from before, but lean, agile types armed with short bows and daggers. One of them, a lanky man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward cautiously. He extended a hand toward the mist-repelling boundary, his fingers trembling as they neared the invisible line. The mist recoiled, hissing like steam on hot metal, and the scout jerked back with a sharp intake of breath. He turned to his companions, gesturing animatedly, and Liam could hear snippets of their hushed conversation. The builder's magic, stronger than reported. The scouts began pacing the perimeter, probing with sticks and stones, mapping the limits of Liam's territory. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't a full assault, it was reconnaissance, a prelude to something worse. He thought of Warlord Kale, the eastern sector warlord Mara had described, a man who hunted builders to stifle competition. If Kale knew the exact strength and layout of Liam's defenses, the next attack would be coordinated and deadly. Liam clenched his fists, the blueprints of potential structures flashing in his mind's eye. He needed walls, not just the rudimentary barriers he'd built so far, but something solid and imposing that could withstand a siege. The interlocking stone blocks of ancient fortifications came to mind, a design he'd studied in his civil engineering courses, each piece locking into the next, distributing weight and resisting impact. It would cost energy, a lot of it, but he had no choice. "Stay here and watch them," Liam said to Mara, his voice low and urgent. "If they cross the boundary, shout. I'm going to start building." Mara nodded, her face pale but determined. She crouched behind a pile of rubble, her eyes fixed on the scouts. Liam retreated to the center of his territory, near the well, where he had the clearest view of the perimeter. Closing his eyes, he summoned the Blueprint of Conquest. A shimmering grid of light unfolded in his vision, overlaying the real world with translucent lines and angles. He focused on the northern edge, where the scouts were most active, and began visualizing the wall. In his mind, he designed each stone block, rough-hewn but precise, with grooves and notches that would interlock like puzzle pieces. He estimated the dimensions, 8 feet high, 3 feet thick, running in a curved arc to protect the most vulnerable approaches. The cost in magical energy glowed red in his calculations, 65% of his current reserve. It was a staggering amount, enough to leave him nearly depleted, but the alternative was leaving his territory exposed. Taking a deep breath, Liam channeled his energy. A warm surge flowed from his core, down his arms, and into the ground. The earth trembled faintly as stones from the nearby rubble piles lifted into the air, guided by his will. They floated toward the northern boundary, arranging themselves in the pattern he'd envisioned. The process was slow and grueling, sweat beaded on his forehead, and his muscles ached with the strain. Each block slotted into place with a soft thud, the interlocking mechanism clicking as it settled. The wall grew stone by stone, a gray ribbon of defiance against the darkening sky. Liam could feel his magical energy draining rapidly, the percentage dropping in his mind's eye, 15%, 10%, 5%. The scouts paused their probing, staring in awe and fear as the structure materialized before them. One of them, the scarred man, nocked an arrow but hesitated, unsure if it would penetrate the magical barrier. By the time the wall was complete, Liam was gasping for breath, his energy reserves hovering at a mere 3%. He staggered, leaning against the well for support. The new wall stood solid and imposing, its surface rough but unyielding. As the last stone settled, a wave of energy pulsed outward from the structure. The mist, which had been creeping closer, recoiled violently, pushed back another 15 feet beyond the wall. The territory radius expanded, the hum of the Blueprint of Conquest growing stronger. Liam allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, but it was short-lived. He knew this was only the beginning. "Liam." Mara's voice cut through the quiet. She pointed east, where the scouts were retreating into the darkness, their forms swallowed by the mist. "They're gone, but I saw more movement out there, torches, maybe dozens of them." Liam nodded, his mind already shifting to the next threat. "Post yourself on top of the storage shed," he instructed. "Use that height to keep watch. I need to rest and let my energy recover, but we can't afford to be caught off guard." Mara scrambled up the crude ladder he'd built earlier, perching on the shed's flat roof with a clear view of the plains. The night deepened, stars piercing the black veil above. Liam sat by the well, sipping water from his water skin and chewing on a piece of dried meat from his looted supplies. His body felt heavy with exhaustion, but his thoughts were sharp. He reviewed his inventory, basic supplies, the ability to design reinforced structures, and now a formidable wall. But against a warlord with an army, it might not be enough. He needed more, traps, watchtowers, maybe even a moat if he could find water sources. The Blueprint of Conquest offered endless possibilities, but each came at a cost he couldn't always pay. Hours passed in tense silence. The only sounds were the whisper of the wind and the distant cry of some night creature. Liam's energy crept back up slowly, reaching around 10% as midnight approached. He was considering starting on a second, shorter wall to the east when Mara's sharp gasp broke the stillness. "Liam. Look." She pointed toward the sky, where a streak of orange light arced over the distant tree-line. Liam's blood ran cold. He recognized it immediately, a flaming arrow, its tip wrapped in oil-soaked cloth, burning bright against the darkness. It soared high, tracing a graceful parabola before descending toward his territory. Time seemed to slow as it cleared the top of his new wall, spinning end over end. Liam could see the sparks trailing in its wake, a deadly messenger from Kale. It landed with a soft thud in the courtyard, just feet from the well, embedding itself in the hard-packed earth. The flames licked at the dry grass, casting flickering shadows across the stone walls. In that moment, the message was clear: war had been declared, and the battle for survival was about to begin in earnest. The first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of orange and gray, casting long shadows across the fortified wall Liam had erected. He stood atop the storage shed, his breath forming faint clouds in the chill air, eyes scanning the eastern plains. Mara huddled beside him, her fingers gripping the rough stone edge, knuckles white. The campfires they had seen the previous night were extinguished, replaced by a low rumble of movement, a dark mass of figures advancing through the mist-shrouded landscape. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs, a steady drumbeat of adrenaline. His magical energy had replenished overnight, hovering around 18%, a thin reserve he knew would be tested. The Blueprint of Conquest hummed in his mind, a constant overlay of structural possibilities, but today it felt heavier, more urgent. He glanced at the supplies looted from Yarrick: dried meat, berries, flint and steel, and the half-full water skin. They were meager comforts against what approached. "They're coming," Mara whispered, her voice trembling. "Kale doesn't waste time." As if on cue, the first raiders emerged from the thinning mist, a dozen armed men and women clad in patchwork leather and scavenged metal. They carried crude wooden ladders, axes, and makeshift shields. At their head, a burly figure with a scarred face bellowed orders, his voice carrying across the distance. Liam recognized the tactics: a frontal assault, meant to overwhelm with brute force. His civil engineer's mind raced, calculating angles, stress points, and weaknesses in his wall. The interlocking stone blocks held firm, but the gate was a vulnerability, a simple wooden barrier reinforced with scavenged iron. The raiders charged, their boots pounding the earth, a cacophony of shouts and clattering weapons. Liam's hands clenched into fists. "Stay low," he told Mara, his voice steady despite the tremor in his gut. He descended the ladder from the shed, his feet hitting the courtyard's packed dirt. The Blueprint of Conquest flared to life, projecting a shimmering grid over the terrain. He focused on the gate, visualizing reinforced hinges, thick iron plates bolted into the stone, designed to distribute weight and resist prying. Magical energy surged from him, a cold drain that made his head spin. The hinges materialized with a metallic groan, costing 10% of his energy, leaving him at 8%. He could feel the strain, a dull ache spreading through his limbs. Outside, the raiders reached the wall. Ladders thudded against the stone, axes began hacking at the gate. Splinters flew, and the wood groaned under the assault. Liam's thoughts sharpened. Water, he needed to slow them down. The well he had built tapped into groundwater, he could divert it. The Blueprint of Conquest shifted, showing a trench design, a simple moat, 3 feet deep and 6 feet wide, circling the gate's exterior. It would require excavation and redirection of the water flow. He poured more energy into the manifestation, his vision blurring at the edges. The ground trembled as earth shifted, stones rearranging, and water gushed from the well's underground channel, filling the newly formed trench. Another 7% of energy drained away, leaving him at a precarious 1%. He staggered, leaning against the wall for support, sweat beading on his forehead. The moat formed just as the raiders breached the gate's lower section. The lead attacker, a woman with wild hair, plunged into the water, her axe slipping from her grasp. Others followed, stumbling into the muddy trench, their momentum broken. Curses and shouts filled the air as they struggled to climb out, the water slowing their advance to a crawl. Liam watched, breath held, as the reinforced hinges held the gate firm despite the damage. The raiders' assault faltered, their coordination shattered by the unexpected obstacle. From the shed roof, Mara cried out, "They're retreating." Liam looked up to see the scarred leader signaling a withdrawal, his face contorted in frustration. The raiders dragged their soaked comrades from the moat, abandoning ladders and weapons as they fled back into the mist. The courtyard fell silent, save for the gurgle of water and Liam's ragged breathing. He slumped to the ground, exhaustion washing over him. His magical energy was nearly depleted, a faint flicker at the edge of his awareness. The defenses had held, but at a cost, his resources were stretched thin, and the wall bore fresh scars. As the sun climbed higher, casting warm light over the battered territory, 2 figures emerged from the mist's edge, hesitant and wary. A man and a woman, both clad in tattered clothes, their faces gaunt with hunger. They approached slowly, hands raised in surrender. Liam pushed himself to his feet, Mara descending to stand beside him. "We saw the fight," the man said, his voice rough. "We're survivors from a camp Kale destroyed. We have no place to go. The woman added, we can work, gather materials, help repair the damage. Liam studied them, his engineer's mind assessing their potential. He needed more hands, and these two seemed genuine, their eyes reflecting the same desperation Mara had shown. What are your names? He asked, his tone cautious. Ilara, the woman replied, gesturing to herself. And this is Torin. The man nodded, his gaze fixed on the moat and reinforced gate with a mix of awe and relief. Liam made a quick decision. You can stay, for now. Help Mara gather stones from the collapsed watchtower, we'll need them to patch the wall. He assigned tasks, his voice gaining strength as he outlined a plan for reinforcement. The newcomers set to work, their movements eager, and Mara led them away, already pointing out material piles. As evening descended, painting the sky in deep purples, Liam stood alone by the gate, running a hand over the new iron hinges. The immediate threat had passed, but his energy was critically low, and the territory's expansion had stalled. He was about to turn back when a sharp, mechanical chime echoed in his mind, cutting through the quiet. The Domain Royale system's voice, cold and impersonal, announced, Alert, safe zone shrinking in 48 hours. Prepare for increased mist density. All players must adapt or perish. The words hung in the air, a new weight settling over the courtyard. Liam's eyes narrowed, his thoughts already racing ahead, to thicker mist, faster shrinkage, and the relentless pressure of the game. His kingdom had survived its first real test, but the true challenge was just beginning. The morning sun filtered through the lingering haze of the mist, casting a pale, sickly light over Liam's territory. He stood at the edge of his fortified wall, his fingers tracing the rough stone where Kael's axes had left shallow gouges. The air tasted of damp earth and the faint, metallic tang of the lethal mist that hovered just beyond the boundary, a constant reminder of the countdown ticking in his mind, 48 hours until the safe zone shrank. His magical energy had replenished overnight, crawling back to a meager 5%, a slow trickle that felt like sand slipping through an hourglass. Liam's gaze swept across the courtyard, now cluttered with the debris of survival, piles of scavenged timber, scattered stones from Mara's trips, and the makeshift well he had diverted for the moat. Beyond, the land within his territory stretched for 100 feet in every direction, a patch of relative safety amidst the Domain Royale's chaos. But safety was a fleeting illusion without sustainability. His stomach growled, a sharp reminder that the basic supplies looted from attackers, dried meat, stale bread, wouldn't last. The survivors huddled near the storage shed, their faces drawn with hunger and exhaustion. Ilara, a woman with dirt-streaked cheeks and wary eyes, was sorting through a bundle of rusty nails, while Torin, a burly man with calloused hands, sharpened a broken spear on a whetstone. Mara crouched by the well, her scavenger's instincts keeping her alert as she scanned the mist for movement. We need food, Liam said, his voice cutting through the morning quiet. He didn't address anyone in particular, but the survivors looked up, their expressions a mix of hope and skepticism. The mist will push us inward soon, and fighting on empty stomachs is a death sentence. We clear that patch of land, he pointed to a swath of overgrown grass and thorny bushes near the eastern wall, for farming. Torin grunted, setting down his spear. Farming? In a death game? That'll take weeks we don't have. Liam shook his head, his mind already racing with calculations. Not with modern methods. I've seen irrigation systems that can triple yield in half the time. But first, we need water flow. He closed his eyes, calling upon the Blueprint of Conquest. In his mind's eye, a grid of light unfolded, overlaying the territory with shimmering lines of magical energy. He visualized the land's topography, a gentle slope from the well toward the proposed farm plot. Drawing from his civil engineering knowledge, he designed a simple aqueduct, a channel of compacted earth and stone, reinforced with interlocking blocks to prevent erosion, leading from the well's overflow to the clearing. The blueprint glowed with a soft blue hue, detailing every joint and gradient. He focused, channeling his magical energy into the manifestation. A warmth spread through his veins, followed by a sharp drain as the energy poured out. The ground trembled faintly, and before the survivors' eyes, the aqueduct began to form. Stones rose from the earth, slotting together with precision, while the channel carved itself into the soil, guided by Liam's will. Sweat beaded on his forehead, he felt the energy dip, 10% gone in a rush, leaving him at a precarious 0%. The structure solidified, a narrow but functional waterway that snaked across the courtyard, ending at the edge of the clearing. A trickle of clean water, diverted from the well's groundwater, started to flow, glinting in the sunlight. Ilara gasped, her hands covering her mouth. I've never seen magic used like that, not for building, only for killing. It's not just magic, Liam replied, his voice strained from the effort. He leaned against the wall, catching his breath. It's engineering. Now, we work. He turned to the survivors, his gaze firm. Mara, you're on lookout, climb the shed roof and watch for Kale's scouts or any missed shifts. Ilara, Torin, with me. We clear the land by hand, no energy to waste on automation. For hours, they toiled under the pale sky. Liam wielded a salvaged pickaxe, breaking up the stubborn soil, while Ilara and Torin hacked at the thorny bushes with crude tools. The labor was grueling, their muscles aching with each swing, but there was a rhythm to it, a shared purpose that slowly eased the tension. As they worked, Liam explained the principles of crop rotation and drainage, his words painting a picture of rows of vegetables and grain that could feed them all. Torin listened with grudging respect, his initial skepticism giving way to focused effort, while Ilara's movements grew more confident, her hands deftly pulling roots from the earth. By midday, they had cleared a rectangular plot, about 20 feet by 30, the dark soil turned and ready. Liam used the last dregs of his replenishing energy, now back to 2%, to manifest a few simple wooden hoes and rakes from the blueprint, costing a negligible 1%. He handed them out. Plant these seeds, he said, producing a small pouch of wild grains and tuber cuttings Mara had scavenged earlier. Space them evenly, and keep the soil moist from the aqueduct. As Ilara and Torin began sowing, Mara's voice rang out from the shed roof, sharp with urgency. Liam. Movement in the mist, due north, about 200 yards out. Not Kale's men, just one figure, but they're glowing. Liam scrambled up a makeshift ladder to join her, his heart pounding. Peering into the hazy distance, he saw it, a solitary silhouette standing at the very edge of the lethal mist, where the grey tendrils swirled but did not touch them. The figure was clad in dark, form-fitting leather, with a hood obscuring their face. Around their hands, a faint, pulsing aura of violet light shimmered, casting eerie shadows on the ground. They held a slender, curved blade that seemed to drink in the mist, its edge gleaming with unnatural sharpness. The figure didn't advance, but their head tilted slightly, as if studying the territory, the new aqueduct, the budding farm plot. Who is that? Mara whispered, her voice trembling. Liam's mind raced. The Domain Royale system's alerts flashed in his memory, warnings about solo players with enhanced abilities, hunters who preyed on expanding territories to steal resources or cheats. This one moved with a predator's grace, untouched by the mist, their presence a silent threat that made the hair on his neck stand up. A territory hunter, he muttered, his grip tightening on the ladder. They're scouting us, waiting for a weakness. Below, Ilara and Torin had stopped their planting, looking up with wide eyes. The peaceful rhythm of their work shattered, replaced by a cold dread. The figure took a slow step forward, the violet aura flaring brighter, and then melted back into the mist, vanishing as suddenly as they had appeared. But the impression lingered, a ghostly watcher in the grey, a new enemy poised to strike. Liam climbed down, his thoughts churning. The safe zone shrinkage loomed, Kale's war simmered, and now this hunter added another layer of peril. He looked at the freshly turned soil, the glistening aqueduct, the survivors' hopeful faces. These were the seeds of a kingdom, fragile but growing. And in the mist, something hungry watched, waiting to devour them all. The night was a blanket of oppressive stillness, broken only by the faint hiss of the lethal mist beyond the fortified wall. Liam sat in the courtyard, his back against the cool stone of the storage shed, eyes tracing the silhouette of the aqueduct he had built. Its smooth, modern lines stood out against the rough-hewn village ruins, a testament to his civil engineering knowledge and the power of the Blueprint of Conquest. His magical energy had replenished to a meager 4%, a slow trickle that felt like a shallow breath after the exertion of the day. He could feel the weight of the approaching safe zone shrinkage, a ticking clock embedded in his bones. Mara was on lookout duty, perched on the shed's roof with a makeshift bough she had scavenged. Her gaze swept the darkness, but the mist clung thickly, obscuring anything beyond 30 feet. Ilara and Torin slept fitfully in the repaired hut, their exhaustion from clearing the farm plot evident in their ragged breathing. Liam's thoughts drifted to the territory hunter he had glimpsed earlier, the violet aura, the curved blade. A solo player with enhanced abilities, lurking like a predator. He tightened his grip on a piece of scrap metal, his mind racing through defensive designs. The Blueprint of Conquest hummed in his consciousness, a constant presence ready to visualize structures, but energy was the limiting factor. Every manifestation cost him, and he couldn't afford waste. A soft, almost imperceptible scraping sound echoed from the direction of the well. Liam froze, his senses sharpening. It wasn't the wind, the air was dead calm. He rose silently, motioning to Mara with a hand signal. She nodded, knocking an arrow. Together, they crept toward the well, their footsteps muffled by the packed earth. The aqueduct ran from the well to the farm plot, a lifeline of water that had cost him dearly in energy. As they approached, Liam saw it, a figure clad in dark, form-fitting leather, crouched by the aqueduct's base. The violet aura was faint but unmistakable, a shimmering haze around the intruder. It was the territory hunter, his curved blade glinting in the moonlight as he pried at a joint in the stone channel. Liam's heart hammered. Sabotage. The hunter was methodical, his movements precise as he loosened a key section of the aqueduct. Water began to trickle out, pooling in the dirt. If the system failed, the farm would wither, and their survival would be jeopardized. Liam didn't hesitate. He activated the Blueprint of Conquest, visualizing a quick repair, a reinforced clamp to seal the leak. The design flashed in his mind, interlocking metal bands, sourced from the scraps in his inventory. He focused his magical energy, feeling it drain from 4% to 2% in a sharp pull. The clamp materialized with a soft glow, snapping into place over the damaged joint. The water flow stabilized, but the hunter whirled, his eyes locking onto Liam with a cold, calculating stare. "You're faster than I expected," the hunter said, his voice a low rasp. He didn't attack immediately, instead stepping back into the shadows, his violet aura flaring. "But speed won't save you from what's coming." Liam kept his distance, Mara's arrow trained on the hunter. "Who are you? Why sabotage my water?" The hunter smirked, a flash of teeth in the dark. "Name's Silas. And your territory is a beacon, engineer. It pushes back the mist, devours the safe zone. Players are starting to notice. They see it as a cheat, a violation of the Domain Royale's rules. I hunt territories like yours, ones that grow too big, too fast. It's how I survive." Silas moved then, a blur of motion as he darted toward the wall, aiming to scale it and escape. Liam reacted instantly, using the Blueprint of Conquest again. This time, he visualized hidden alarm tripwires, thin, nearly invisible strands of metal, anchored to the ground and connected to small bells. The design was simple but effective, drawn from his knowledge of security systems. It cost him another 1% of his energy, dropping him to 1%, and required the last of his metal scraps from the inventory. The tripwires manifested in a ring around Silas, glinting faintly. As Silas lunged, his foot caught one, and a sharp chime rang out, echoing through the silent territory. Mara's arrow flew, grazing Silas's shoulder. He stumbled, his violet aura flickering. Liam closed in, grabbing a fallen branch as a makeshift club. "You're trapped. Talk, or this gets worse." Silas glared, clutching his wound. "Fine. You want to know? Warlord Kale isn't the only one gunning for you. There are others, solo players, small factions. They see your structures, your expansion. The game system alerts them when territory grows too rapidly. You're painting a target on your back, and I was sent to weaken you first. Sabotage the water, create chaos, make you vulnerable for the next attack." Liam's mind raced. The Domain Royale system was manipulating them, using territory alerts to pit players against each other. Silas wasn't just a mindless hunter, he was a tool in a larger game. But his skills, enhanced agility, knowledge of territories, could be valuable. Liam lowered the branch. "Join me. Help defend this place. You're wasting your talents hunting for scraps in the mist." Silas laughed bitterly. "Why would I? You're doomed. Kale is rallying allies. He's promised them loot from your territory once it falls." "Because I'm building something that lasts," Liam said, his voice steady. "Not just survival, but a kingdom. You saw the aqueduct, modern infrastructure, sanitation, agriculture. With your abilities, we can fortify it further. Stop running and help me make it unassailable." For a long moment, Silas was silent, his violet aura dimming to a soft pulse. He glanced at the repaired aqueduct, the tripwires, the fortified wall. Then he nodded slowly. "All right. But if this falls, I'm gone. And my loyalty comes at a price, shelter, food, and a share of any loot from attackers." Liam agreed, extending a hand. Silas took it, his grip firm. As dawn began to lighten the sky, a new tension settled over the territory. The survivors gathered, eyeing Silas warily. Liam assigned him to scout the perimeter, using his enhanced abilities to monitor for threats. The energy cost of the repairs and tripwires had left Liam drained, but the capture felt like a small victory. As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the courtyard, a figure emerged from the mist beyond the wall. It was a messenger, clad in ragged armor, holding a tattered banner with Kale's insignia, a snarling beast. He stopped just outside the mist-repelling boundary, his voice booming across the silence. Liam. Warlord Kale demands your surrender. Lay down your defenses, abandon your territory, and you may be spared. Refuse, and he will unite with the Eastern Bloc warlords and the River Clan. A full-scale alliance marches at dawn. You have until sunset to decide. The messenger turned and vanished into the mist, leaving the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. Liam stood at the wall, his hands clenched. The safe zone shrinkage was in less than 48 hours, and now Kale was forging alliances. Silas watched from nearby, his violet aura flaring with unease. The territory felt smaller suddenly, the walls less imposing. Liam's kingdom was growing, but so were the forces arrayed against it. The morning sun cast long shadows across the packed earth of Liam's territory, its light catching on the dew that clung to the newly repaired aqueduct. Liam stood at the edge of the farm plot, his fingers tracing invisible lines in the air as the blueprint of conquest hummed in his mind. The envoy from Warlord Kale would arrive soon, a messenger with threats wrapped in formal demands. He could feel the weight of his dwindling magical energy, a faint pulse at the back of his skull that reminded him of his vulnerability. 1%. Enough for minor repairs, perhaps a simple structure, but nothing grand. He needed time, and time required cleverness. Mara approached from the western wall, her scavenger's eyes sharp. He's coming, she said, her voice low. Alone, but armed. Carries a banner with Kale's mark, a broken axe on black cloth. Liam nodded, his gaze sweeping over the territory. The reinforced gate still bore scars from the last assault, deep gouges in the wood where axes had bitten. Beyond it, the mist churned at the boundary, its lethal grey tendrils held back by the invisible force of his expanded territory. He could see Silas perched on the watchtower platform they'd cobbled together from salvaged timber, the territory hunter's violet aura a subtle shimmer in the daylight. Recruiting him had been a risk, but his enhanced senses were already proving valuable. Bring him to the clearing by the well, Liam said. Keep Ilara and Torin out of sight. I don't want Kale knowing our numbers. As Mara moved to obey, Liam walked to the designated meeting spot. The well stood at the center of a small, open area, its stone rim worn smooth by generations of use before the death game. He positioned himself beside it, hands clasped behind his back, adopting the posture of a civil engineer assessing a site, calm, observant, in control. The envoy arrived minutes later, a tall man with a scarred face and eyes that missed nothing. He wore leather armor stained with dirt and blood, and the banner in his hand fluttered in the breeze, the broken axe emblem looking like a promise of violence. Liam, the envoy said, his voice gravelly. Warlord Kale offers you one chance. Surrender your territory by sunset. Disband your structures, and you may leave with your life. Refuse, and he will bring an alliance that will crush you. Liam studied the man, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his free hand hovered near the hilt of his sword. This wasn't just a messenger, it was a scout, assessing defenses. Liam forced a slow breath, letting the silence stretch. Your warlord attacks my walls, then demands surrender, he said, his tone measured. Why should I trust his mercy? Because the alternative is death, the envoy snapped. The safe zone shrinks in less than 2 days. Kale has eyes on your land. He sees your innovations. The word was spat out like a curse. Players like you unbalance the game. The system alerts everyone to your growth. You're a target. Liam's mind raced. The Domain Royale system, it was pitting players against him, using territory alerts as a weapon. He needed to stall, to make Kale hesitate. Tell your warlord I propose a different path, he said, keeping his voice steady. A non-aggression pact. My territory produces food and clean water. In exchange for leaving us in peace, I'll trade resources. You have fighters, we have sustainability. It's better than wasting lives on another assault. The envoy's eyes narrowed. Kale doesn't trade with builders. He conquers. Then he'll bleed for it, Liam said, gesturing to the walls. These defenses held once. They'll hold again. But how many of his raiders will die to the mist when the safe zone shrinks? My land repels it. That's worth more than pride. For a moment, the envoy hesitated, his gaze flicking to the aqueduct, the farm plot where green shoots were pushing through the soil. Liam could see the calculation in his eyes, the recognition that this territory offered something rare in the Domain Royale, stability. But then the man's expression hardened. "I'll deliver your offer," he said, the word dripping with disdain. "But don't expect kindness. Sunset is your deadline." As the envoy turned and strode back toward the mist, Liam felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He'd bought a few hours, maybe less. Time to fortify, to prepare. But first, he needed to address the more immediate threat, food. The irrigation system was working, but without storage, any harvest would spoil or be looted. He walked to the edge of the farm plot, where Elara and Torin were weeding, their movements efficient but hurried. Torin glanced up, his skepticism from earlier still lingering in his eyes. "We need a granary," Liam said, ignoring the doubt. "Something secure, dry, and large enough to hold a season's yield." Elara wiped sweat from her brow. "The soil's good, but we're weeks from a real harvest. And if Kale attacks? Then we make sure we survive long enough to eat," Liam interrupted. He closed his eyes, summoning the Blueprint of Conquest. In his mind's eye, a structure took shape, a simple, rectangular building with raised floors to prevent dampness, thick walls of packed earth and timber, and a sloped roof to shed rain. It was basic, utilitarian, designed for preservation over grandeur. The cost flickered in his consciousness, 3% of his magical energy. He had 1%. The deficit ached, a hollow feeling that spread through his limbs. He pushed past it, focusing on the design. "Torin, gather more timber from the fallen trees by the eastern boundary. Elara, start mixing clay and straw for dog. We'll build it by hand where we can, and I'll use my ability for the critical supports." Torin opened his mouth as if to protest, but Mara's voice cut through from the wall. "Liam. Silas reports movement in the mist, scouts, maybe more. They're keeping distance, but watching." Liam's jaw tightened. Kale wasn't waiting for sunset. He was probing, testing defenses. "Keep working," he told Elara and Torin. "I'll handle the granary." He walked to a flat area near the farm plot, where the ground was firm and dry. Kneeling, he placed his palms on the earth, feeling the residual hum of his territory's magic. The Blueprint of Conquest activated, and a surge of energy drained from him, a sharp, cold pull that left him lightheaded. His magical energy plummeted, 1% to 0%, then into negative reserves he hadn't known existed. A wave of nausea hit him, and he swayed, vision blurring. But the structure began to form. Timber frames rose from the ground, not manifesting from nothing but guided from the nearby piles Torin had gathered, snapping into place with whispered cracks. Earthen walls coalesced, packed solid by an invisible force, and a roof of lashed branches took shape overhead. It was smaller than he'd envisioned, the energy shortage forcing compromises, but it stood, a granary, roughly 10 feet by 15, with a door that could be barred from the inside. As the last timber settled, Liam slumped forward, catching himself on his hands. His breath came in ragged gasps. The cost had been higher than estimated, he'd tapped into something deeper, and now his magical energy read as a faint, flickering 0.5%, barely enough to sustain his territory's mist-repelling field. Elara rushed to his side, her hand steadying him. "You're pushing too hard," she murmured. "No choice," Liam rasped, standing slowly. The granary loomed before them, a testament to desperation. Now, the farmland. We need to expand it. If we're going to feed everyone through a siege, we need more crops. He directed them to clear an adjacent plot, using hand tools from his inventory, basic supplies looted from attackers long gone. As they worked, Liam supervised, his mind racing through calculations. The non-aggression pact was a long shot, but it had planted a seed of doubt in Kale's envoy. Maybe it would make the warlord hesitate, reconsider the cost of an assault. Or maybe it would just anger him further. By midday, the expanded farmland was taking shape, rows of turned earth ready for planting. Liam had conserved his energy, relying on manual labor, but the tension was palpable. Silas descended from the watchtower, his curved blade gleaming at his hip. "The scouts pulled back," he reported. "But they left markers, tied cloth to trees at the territory edge. It's a warning. Kale's claiming this land for his alliance." Liam's stomach dropped. "Alliance?" "Rumors in the mist," Silas said, his voice low. "Kale's been meeting with other warlords. 2 of them, Brant from the northern ruins, and Lissa from the Riverlands. They hate builders more than they hate each other. Before Liam could respond, Mara came running from the eastern gate, her face pale. Scouts are back, she panted. Not ours, Kale's. They didn't approach, just watched and left. But one of our lookouts, a new recruit named Finn, followed their trail. He just returned. Finn, a minor character, a survivor who joined quietly days earlier, stumbled into the clearing, his clothes torn and breathless. Liam hadn't even known he'd left. Liam, Finn gasped, collapsing to his knees. I saw them. Kale's camp, about 3 miles east. He's not alone. Brant and Lissa are there. Their forces combined, over 50 fighters. Maybe more. They're gathering weapons, sharpening blades. They plan to march at dawn. The words hung in the air, heavy as stone. Liam looked at his territory, the granary, the farm, the walls that suddenly seemed far too thin. Over 50. Against his handful of survivors, his depleted energy, his fragile defenses. The non-aggression pact was ashes now. Kale had chosen war. Silas's hand went to his blade. We have until dawn. Liam nodded slowly, his mind already shifting to defense plans, trap placements, resource allocation. But beneath the strategist's calm, a cold fear settled. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and time had just run out. The safe zone shrinkage in 48 hours was now a secondary concern. The real storm was gathering in the east, and it would break upon them with the first light of morning. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Liam stood at the edge of his territory, the morning light casting long shadows from the newly constructed granary. His fingers traced the rough wood of the outer wall, feeling the grain beneath his touch as he calculated distances. Kale's alliance with Brant and Lissa meant over 50 fighters would arrive at dawn tomorrow, less than 24 hours to prepare. Finn's report from the previous evening echoed in his mind, 3 warlords combining forces, their camps visible from the eastern ridge. Liam's territory had grown from a ruined village to a fortified town with irrigation, farmland, and granaries, but against a coordinated assault, walls alone wouldn't suffice. He needed weapons. Not just the scavenged blades and bows his survivors carried, but something that could turn the tide without depleting his already strained magical reserves. He closed his eyes, calling upon the Blueprint of Conquest. The familiar interface shimmered before him, a translucent overlay of geometric lines and energy readings. His magical energy hovered at 0.5%, a dangerously low level that made his head throb with the effort of maintaining the visualization. But he pushed through, focusing on the northern section of the wall where the terrain offered a slight elevation advantage. Watchtowers, he thought, the design forming in his mind's eye. Not mere platforms, but integrated structures with arrow slits for cover, reinforced foundations to withstand impacts, and connecting walkways that would allow defenders to move without exposing themselves. He estimated the cost, 0.3% of his energy per tower, with 3 needed to cover the most vulnerable approaches. That would leave him nearly depleted, but survival demanded the risk. Liam opened his eyes, his breath fogging in the cool morning air. Mara, he called, his voice carrying across the courtyard. The scavenger-turned-survivor appeared from behind the granary, her movements quick and efficient. Liam. What do you need? Gather everyone who isn't on lookout duty, he said, his tone urgent but controlled. We're building watchtowers. And I need someone to scout the eastern ridge, Silas would be best for that. Mara nodded, her expression grim. I'll find him. The others are already nervous. Torin's been muttering about running before the attack. Liam's jaw tightened. Tell him running means the mist. Here, at least we have a chance. As Mara hurried off, Liam turned his attention back to the blueprint. He selected the first tower location, a spot where the wall curved inward, creating a blind spot for archers. With a deep breath, he channeled his magical energy, feeling it drain from him like water through a sieve. The air shimmered, particles of light coalescing into wood and stone. The structure rose from the ground, beams slotting into place with audible clicks, arrow slits forming at precise intervals. When it was done, Liam staggered, his vision swimming. The energy reading dropped to 0.2%. He leaned against the wall, sweat beading on his forehead. One down, he muttered, forcing himself upright. By mid-morning, the survivors had assembled, Ilara and Torin with their tools, Finn looking anxious but determined, and a handful of others whose names Liam had learned in passing, Corin, a former farmer with strong arms, and Liana, a quiet woman who'd lost her family to the mist. Silas approached last, his movements fluid and silent, the curved blade at his hip catching the light. You wanted me to scout? Silas asked, his voice low. Liam nodded. The eastern ridge. I need to know if Kale's forces are moving earlier than expected. And look for any weaknesses in their formation. Silas's eyes gleamed with understanding. Territory hunters are good at spotting gaps. I'll be back by dusk. He melted into the landscape, his enhanced abilities making him nearly invisible against the terrain. With Silas gone, Liam directed the survivors to the next tower site. We'll build this one manually as much as we can, he explained, pointing to a pile of timber and stone they'd gathered over previous days. I'll use the blueprint only for the critical reinforcements. That way, we conserve energy. Torin scowled, hefting a hammer. You expect us to build towers in a day? While an army gathers? I expect us to survive, Liam said, meeting Torin's gaze. And that means working together. Elara, you and Corin handle the foundation. Liana, organize the materials. Finn, keep watch from the first tower, report any movement. The group set to work, the sound of hammering and sawing filling the air. Liam supervised, his mind racing. Watchtowers would help with defense, but they needed more, tools, weapons, anything to give them an edge. His thoughts turned to the scraps of metal in his inventory, broken blades, hinges from ruined buildings, bits of armor looted from attackers. With enough heat and proper shaping, they could be reforged. He walked to a cleared area near the center of the territory, away from the walls. Here, the ground was firm and level, suitable for a foundry. Again, he summoned the blueprint, this time designing a simple but effective structure, a stone furnace with a bellows system, anvils for shaping, and troughs for quenching. The design was basic by modern standards, but in this death game, it was revolutionary. Channeling his remaining energy, Liam felt a sharp pain behind his eyes. The foundry materialized in stages, first the stone base, then the clay-lined furnace, finally the tools. When it was complete, his magical energy plummeted to 0.1%, the lowest he'd ever been. He swayed, catching himself on the anvil, its cold metal searing his palm. Elara noticed his distress and rushed over. Liam. You're pushing too hard. No choice, he gasped, straightening. We need weapons. This foundry can turn scrap into spearheads, arrowheads, maybe even reinforced armor plates. But it requires fuel and someone who knows how to work metal. Corin stepped forward, wiping sweat from his brow. My grandfather was a blacksmith. I watched him sometimes. I can try. Liam nodded, gratitude washing over him. Good. Start with the smaller scraps, practice before we commit the larger pieces. Elara, help him gather wood for the furnace. We'll need a hot, sustained fire. As the afternoon wore on, the second watchtower rose through combined effort, manual labor supplemented by Liam's precise use of the blueprint for key joints and supports. His energy ticked up slightly to 0.2% as it replenished, but the strain left him feeling hollowed out. He moved among the survivors, offering guidance where needed, his civil engineer's mind assessing every angle and stress point. By late afternoon, Silas returned, his expression tense. Kale's forces are camped 2 miles east, he reported, joining Liam by the newly built foundry. They've got makeshift siege ladders and at least 10 archers. Brandt's group is heavily armored, slow but tough. Lissa's fighters are quicker, skirmishers from the look of it. They plan to attack at first light, just as Finn said. Liam absorbed the information, his mind mapping the battlefield. Any weaknesses? Their coordination is shaky, Silas said. Kale barks orders, but the other warlords don't seem to respect him fully. If we can break their initial charge, the alliance might fracture. Then we'll aim for that, Liam said. Silas, I want you to train a small group in scouting and hit-and-run tactics. Use your enhanced abilities to show them how to move quietly, strike fast, and retreat. We can't match them in open combat, but we can harass their flanks. Silas nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. Understood. I'll take Finn and 2 others, they're light on their feet. As dusk approached, Liam gathered all the survivors in the courtyard. The third watchtower was nearly complete, its silhouette stark against the fading light. The foundry glowed with the first successful fire, Corin hammering a piece of scrap metal into a rough blade shape. Listen. Liam called, his voice cutting through the murmur of anxious conversations. Tomorrow, we face our greatest threat yet. But look around you, we have walls they didn't expect, towers to give us height advantage, and soon, weapons forged from their own discarded tools. We're not just surviving, we're building something that defies this game. He paused, letting his words sink in. Tonight, we drill. Everyone will know their position, archers in the towers, spearmen at the gates, runners to relay messages. Silas will lead a scouting team to disrupt their advance. We fight not as individuals, but as a unit. The survivors responded with determined nods, even Torin's skepticism tempered by the tangible progress around them. They spent the next hours practicing, Liam directing movements, Silas demonstrating stealth techniques, Corin testing the first batch of newly forged spearheads. The air grew cold as night fell, but the activity kept them warm, a sense of purpose driving away fear. It was near midnight when the change began. Finn, stationed in the first watchtower, shouted a warning. The mist. It's moving. Liam rushed to the northern wall, climbing the ladder to join Finn. What he saw chilled him more than the night air. The lethal mist, which had hovered a steady distance away for days, was advancing, not in its usual slow creep, but in a sudden, surging wave. It swallowed the landscape beyond the territory, trees and rocks vanishing into its opaque gray embrace. The safe zone was shrinking, and faster than before. The game system is accelerating, Liam muttered, his hands gripping the wooden railing. It knows we're preparing. Within minutes, the mist reached the outer perimeter of his territory. It didn't cross the boundary, his structures still repelled it, the blueprint's power holding firm, but it pressed against the walls like a living thing, tendrils curling upward as if probing for weakness. The distance between safety and annihilation was now mere feet, the mist's eerie silence amplifying the tension. Below, the survivors stared, their drills forgotten. Ilara's face was pale, Torin's knuckles white on his spear. Even Silas looked unsettled, his enhanced senses likely picking up the wrongness in the air. Liam descended the ladder, his mind racing. The attack at dawn would now happen with the mist at their backs, no room for retreat, no margin for error. Every defense had to hold, every fighter had to stand their ground. He met the eyes of his people, seeing the fear there, but also a flicker of resolve. This changes nothing, he said, his voice steady despite the cold dread in his gut. We hold the line here, or we fall to the mist. There's no other option. Back to your positions, finish the preparations. We have a few hours left. As they dispersed, Liam looked up at the watchtower silhouetted against the starless sky, the foundry's embers glowing like a beacon in the dark. His territory was now an island in a sea of death, the mist lapping at its edges. Tomorrow's battle would decide everything, not just against Kael's alliance, but against the very rules of the Domain Royale. And as the mist crept closer, he knew the true test was just beginning. The morning sun bled through a sky stained with the ashen hues of the lethal mist, casting long, distorted shadows across the fortified walls of Liam's territory. From his vantage point in the central watchtower, Liam watched the horizon where the mist churned like a living thing, its edge now a mere 100 meters from the outer palisade. The air tasted of ozone and damp earth, a cold, creeping reminder of the game's relentless countdown. Below, the town was a hive of tense activity. Survivors moved with purpose, their faces set in grim determination as they checked weapons and reinforced barricades. Mara scurried between groups, distributing water skins, her eyes darting nervously toward the eastern approach. Silas stood beside Liam, his violet-tinged aura faintly visible in the dim light, a curved blade resting at his hip. They'll come from the east, Silas said, his voice low. Kael's alliance favors open ground for their numbers. Liam nodded, his mind racing through the blueprint of conquest. His magical energy reserves were a threadbare 0.1%, a fragile resource he had to conserve. He visualized the pre-built traps, shallow pitfalls lined with sharpened stakes, scattered caltrops of twisted metal, that lay hidden beyond the walls. They were simple designs, costing minimal energy to activate, but they could buy precious seconds. A distant rumble echoed across the plain, growing louder with each passing moment. Through the mist's haze, figures emerged, a dark mass of warriors marching in loose formation. Warlord Kael led the vanguard, his armor glinting dully in the filtered light, flanked by two other leaders Liam recognized from Finn's descriptions, Brant, a hulking man with a spiked mace, and Lissa, a lithe woman with twin daggers. Their force numbered over 50, a mix of armored fighters and archers, their banners flapping in the chill wind. The ground trembled under their boots, a rhythmic drumbeat of impending violence. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs, but his training as an engineer forced calm into his thoughts. He focused on the blueprint, feeling the faint pulse of his remaining energy. With a mental command, he activated the traps. A series of soft clicks and groans sounded from the earth, almost lost in the approaching din. Pitfalls yawned open, their edges camouflaged with loose soil, and caltrops scattered like metallic seeds across the path. The first wave of attackers hit the traps without warning. A frontline warrior stumbled into a pit, his scream cut short as stakes pierced his legs. Others cursed as caltrops bit into their feet, slowing their advance to a hobble. Kale bellowed orders, his voice raw with fury, and the force regrouped, archers knocking arrows. Liam raised a hand, signaling the defenders. From the watchtowers, survivors, including Finn and Torin, took aim through arrow slits, their bows drawn tight. Fire! Liam shouted, his voice carrying over the wind. A volley of arrows arced through the air, peppering the enemy ranks. Several attackers fell, but the majority pressed on, shields raised. Kale's archers returned fire, their arrows thudding into the wooden walls with dull thunks. One struck near Liam's head, embedding itself in the timber with a shudder. He ducked, his breath coming in short gasps. Silas moved with fluid grace, his enhanced abilities allowing him to deflect incoming arrows with his blade, a blur of motion that seemed almost supernatural. Liam concentrated again, using the blueprint to reinforce the gate's hinges with a surge of energy that dropped his reserves to 0.05%. The metal groaned as it thickened, but the cost left him lightheaded, a cold sweat beading on his forehead. Below, Mara and Alara helped drag wounded defenders to safety, their hands stained with dirt and blood. Corin worked feverishly at the foundry, hammering scrap metal into spearheads, the clang of his forge a steady counterpoint to the chaos. The battle raged for what felt like hours, though the sun had barely climbed higher. Liam's defenders held the line, their coordination sharpened by Silas's training. They used hit-and-run tactics, emerging from hidden sally ports to strike at flanks before retreating behind the walls. Kale's force, hampered by the traps and watchtower fire, began to falter, their numbers thinning as the mist crept closer, its tendrils licking at the rear of their formation. Liam felt a strange shift in the air, a vibration through the blueprint. His territory expanded slightly, the walls pushing back against the mist by a few meters, a reward from the game system for repelling the attack. The ground beneath him seemed to hum with newfound stability, but the victory was fleeting. As the first wave broke, retreating with curses and dragging their wounded, Kale stepped forward, his face a mask of rage. He gestured to the rear of his army, where a group of fighters hauled a massive, crude structure into view. It was a battering ram, fashioned from a felled tree trunk and reinforced with metal bands, its head capped with a spike of jagged iron. The ram rested on a wheeled platform, pulled by a dozen straining warriors. Kale's voice cut through the relative quiet, dripping with malice. "You think your walls can save you, builder," he roared. "We'll smash your gate to splinters and feast on your bones before the mist claims us all." The ram began to move, its wheels creaking under the weight, gaining momentum as it rolled across the scarred ground. Liam's eyes widened, his mind racing. The gate, though reinforced, might not hold against such force. He glanced at his defenders, their faces pale with exhaustion and fear. The mist swirled closer, a grey wall of death at their backs, and the ram charged, a relentless engine of destruction aimed at the heart of his kingdom. The impact echoed through the courtyard like a thunderclap, a deep, resonant boom that vibrated through the soles of Liam's boots. Splinters of reinforced wood sprayed inward from the main gate, catching the morning light as they tumbled through the air. The battering ram, a crude but massive log capped with rusted metal, had struck true. Through the newly formed crack, Liam could see the straining faces of Kale's warriors, their muscles corded as they hauled the ram back for another swing. Again. Kale's voice roared from beyond the gate, distorted but unmistakable. "Break it open." Liam's heart hammered against his ribs. His magical energy reserve sat at a precarious 0.05%, a faint, flickering ember in his mind's eye where the blueprint of conquest normally burned with steady light. The gate, which had seemed so formidable when he'd reinforced it hours earlier, now looked terrifyingly fragile. Each impact sent visible tremors through the heavy timbers, and the iron brackets he'd manifested were beginning to groan under the strain. From the nearest watchtower, Finn's voice cut through the chaos. "They're forming up for another push. The ram's crew has about 10 fighters protecting it." Liam's eyes darted across the courtyard. Survivors huddled behind makeshift barricades, their faces pale but determined. Corin stood by the foundry entrance, clutching a freshly forged spear, its tip still glowing faintly from the quenching process. Alara and Torin had taken positions on the eastern wall, ready with bundles of sharpened stakes to drop on any climbers. The air smelled of sweat, fear, and the ever-present metallic tang of the approaching mist, which now swirled just 20 meters beyond the outer walls. Another boom. This time, the crack widened, revealing a sliver of the battlefield outside. Liam saw the battering ram crew, burly men in mismatched armor, their faces streaked with grime and determination. Behind them, Cale stood with Brant and Lissa, the three warlords watching with cold calculation. Brant, a hulking figure with a scarred face, gestured toward the walls where Silas had been coordinating arrow fire. Lissa, lean and sharp-eyed, kept glancing at the mist as if measuring its advance. Liam's mind raced. The gate wouldn't hold. Not against sustained pounding. He needed structural reinforcement, something to redistribute the force, but his magical energy was nearly depleted. The blueprint of conquest unfolded in his consciousness, showing him the gate's weak points in glowing red lines. He could see exactly where the stress was concentrating, where the next impact would likely cause catastrophic failure. Manifest emergency buttresses, he whispered to himself, the words tasting like ash. Internal support beams angled to transfer load to the ground. The blueprint responded, calculating the required energy. It would cost him everything he had left. There would be no more manifestations today, no quick fixes if something else went wrong. But if the gate fell, nothing else would matter. He closed his eyes, focusing on that dwindling ember of power. The world narrowed to the sensation of magical energy flowing from his core, through his outstretched hands, and into the gate structure. Inside the gatehouse, thick wooden beams materialized from shimmering air, slamming into place at 45-degree angles between the gate and the stone foundations. The wood groaned as it took on the strain, fresh sap oozing from the grain where it met older timber. The next impact came. Instead of the gate buckling inward, the entire structure shuddered as the force dissipated through the new buttresses and into the ground. Dust rained from the ceiling of the gatehouse, but the crack didn't widen. "It's holding!" Torrin shouted from the wall, his voice cracking with relief. But Liam knew it was temporary. The buttresses would by minutes, not hours. And Cale's forces had already noticed the change. Through the crack, he saw Lissa pointing at the gatehouse roof, shouting instructions to a group of archers. "They're going for height advantage," Silas said, appearing suddenly at Liam's side. The territory hunter moved with silent grace, his curved blade already drawn. "The buttresses are good, but they make the gate a stationary target. We need to take out the ram." Liam studied Silas's face. The man's violet aura, usually a faint shimmer around his form, pulsed slightly with readiness. "Can you do it?" "With a distraction," Silas said, his eyes already scanning the courtyard. "If your people can draw their attention to the walls, I can slip out through the postern gate. It's still clear on the western side." "Too risky," Liam said, even as he knew it was their best option. "The mist is almost at the walls. If you get caught outside when it advances." "Better than waiting for them to break through," Silas countered. "I've survived worse than a quick dash through thinning air." Another impact shook the gate. This time, one of the buttresses cracked audibly, a sharp snap that made several survivors flinch. Liam felt the remaining magical energy in his reserves dip, 0.02%. Almost nothing. He had one more trick, something he designed but never implemented because of the energy cost. "Counterweight drop mechanism," he muttered, pulling up the blueprint. "Built into the gatehouse arch requires precise timing." He explained it quickly to Silas, a heavy stone counterweight suspended above the gate's exterior, designed to drop when triggered, crushing anything directly in front of the entrance. The mechanism existed in blueprint form, fully designed with pulleys and release catches, but he'd never manifested it. "Do it," Silas said. "I'll time my move for when it drops. The confusion will cover my approach." Liam nodded, his throat tight. This would burn his last reserves. He reached for that final flicker of power, feeling it slip away like sand through fingers. The sensation was strangely cold, a hollowing out at his core as the blueprint of conquest activated one last time. Above the gate's exterior, stone blocks materialized from shimmering air, slotting together with grinding precision to form a massive counterweight suspended by thick ropes. Pulleys manifested on the gatehouse roof, their metal components gleaming briefly before settling into place. The entire structure looked incongruous, ancient stone and wood suddenly augmented by this engineered addition. "Now!" Liam gasped, the word barely audible as the last of his magical energy vanished. 0%. The blueprint in his mind went dark, leaving only memory and instinct. He yanked the release lever he'd manifested beside the gate. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the rope snapped, and the counterweight dropped with terrifying speed. The stone block crashed down directly in front of the gate, missing the battering ram by less than a meter. The impact sent shockwaves through the ground, throwing several of Kale's warriors off their feet. Dust and debris billowed outward in a choking cloud, obscuring everything. Silas was already moving, slipping through the postern gate like a shadow. Liam lost sight of him immediately in the chaos. From the walls, Finn shouted, "The ram crew is disoriented. They're pulling back." Through the dust, Liam saw the battering ram abandoned momentarily as warriors scrambled to avoid falling debris. But Kale's voice cut through the confusion, rallying his forces. "Hold position. It's just a trick. Get back to the ram." The momentary advantage was slipping away. Liam watched helplessly as Kale's warriors regrouped, their discipline overcoming the surprise. The counterweight had bought them seconds, not the minutes they needed. Then movement at the edge of the dust cloud. Silas emerged like a phantom, his curved blade flashing. He moved with unnatural speed, his violet aura flaring as he activated whatever enhanced abilities territory hunters possessed. 2 of the ram's guards fell before they could raise their weapons. A third managed to parry, but Silas flowed around the defense, his blade finding a gap in the armor. "He's at the ram." Ilara cried from the wall, knocking an arrow to cover him. Silas reached the battering ram itself. Instead of trying to destroy the massive log, an impossible task with just a blade, he went for the ropes and harnesses that allowed the crew to swing it. His blade sliced through thick cords with precise strokes. The ram sagged, its forward momentum lost as support lines parted. But Kale had seen him. Hunter on the field. Archers. A volley of arrows arced toward Silas. He danced between them, his movements almost too fast to follow, but one shaft grazed his shoulder, tearing cloth and drawing blood. He didn't slow, finishing his work on the ram before turning to retreat. "Covering fire." Liam shouted, and his survivors responded. Arrows from the watchtowers peppered Kale's archers, forcing them to take cover. Silas used the distraction to sprint back toward the postern gate. He almost made it. A crossbow bolt, fired not from Kale's forces but from a different direction entirely, thudded into the ground at Silas's feet. He skidded to a halt, his head snapping toward the source. Liam followed his gaze. To the rear of the territory, where the mist now lapped against the very stones of the outer wall, figures emerged from the swirling gray. Not Kale's warriors, these moved with different purpose, slipping through the thinning barrier between safety and lethal fog. There were 6 of them, maybe 7, dressed in scavenged gear that marked them as rogue players rather than organized forces. They carried an assortment of weapons, a rusted axe, several knives, one even wielding what looked like a reforged piece of farm equipment as a spear. Their leader, a lean woman with wild hair tied back with leather cords, raised her crossbow again, this time aiming not at Silas but at the undefended section of wall where the mist was closest. Her eyes, visible even at this distance, held a calculating greed as they scanned Liam's territory. "Raiders," Finn breathed from his watchtower, the word carrying clearly in the sudden lull. "They're hitting us from behind." Silas stood trapped between Kale's regrouping forces and the new threat, the postern gate still 10 meters away. The mist continued its slow, inexorable advance, now touching the stones where the raiders had emerged. And the gate, though temporarily saved, groaned with every shift of its damaged frame. Liam's hands clenched into fists. No magical energy. A weakened gate. Enemies on 2 fronts. And the mist, always the mist, creeping closer with patient, deadly intent. The air in the courtyard tasted of panic and damp stone. Liam stood on the makeshift platform he'd erected days ago for announcements, watching as the crowd of survivors swelled into a restless mass. The distant thud of Kale's remaining forces testing the damaged gate echoed through the morning fog, but it was the whispers behind him that carried the real threat. "We're trapped between the warlord and the mist," a man's voice rose above the murmurs. It was Garrett, one of the early joiners who'd helped with the first water system. His hands trembled as he gestured toward the eastern wall where the lethal mist now lapped against the stone like a gray, hungry tide. "And now raiders at our backs. This was supposed to be safe." Liam's magical energy reserves were at absolute zero, he could feel the emptiness like a hollowed-out space behind his ribs where the Blueprint of Conquest usually hummed. But the system in his mind still functioned, showing him the structural integrity of every wall, every watchtower. The main gate, despite the buttresses he'd manifested, showed stress fractures and crimson lines across his mental display. "He's right," a woman's voice joined, Ilara, her face smudged with soot from the foundry. She'd been assigned to gather materials, but now she stood with arms crossed, defiance in her posture. "We followed you because you promised protection. Not to be squeezed between 3 different deaths." From the watchtowers, Silas watched the proceedings with narrowed eyes, one hand pressed to the bandage on his arm where the arrow had grazed him. Below him, Corin paused his work at the forge, the rhythmic clang of hammer on metal falling silent. Even Mara, usually pragmatic, shifted uneasily where she stood near the food stores. Liam took a slow breath, the air cool against his throat. He could see the numbers in his mind, 73 survivors total, including the 6 rogue players currently being held under guard near the rear wall. The rogue leader, a woman with sharp features and a crossbow slung across her back, watched the descent with calculating eyes from her restrained position. "Listen to me," Liam began, his voice carrying without shouting. He'd learned that trick on construction sites, projection came from the diaphragm, not the throat. "The gate is holding. The watchtowers give us visibility. The mist hasn't breached our walls. Yet," shouted a man Liam didn't recognize, a newer arrival with a scar across his cheek. "It's eating at the stone right now. I saw it this morning, the outer layer crumbles where it touches." That was true. Liam's system display confirmed it, the outermost wall's integrity had dropped to 87% where the mist made contact. The magical energy that usually repelled the encroaching death had depleted with his reserves, leaving only physical barriers to hold it back. A child began crying somewhere in the crowd, the sound sharp and frightened. The mother hushed her, but the damage was done, the fear had found its voice. Liam closed his eyes for a moment, reaching for the Blueprint of Conquest. The interface responded sluggishly, like trying to move through thick mud. 0% energy meant he couldn't manifest new structures, but the design function still worked. He visualized the courtyard space, the panicked crowd, the need for something more than walls and weapons. He opened his eyes. "You're afraid because you're standing in the open," he said, his voice gaining strength. "You're afraid because you feel exposed. So let's change that." With a thought, he activated the design function. A shimmering blueprint appeared in the air before him, not a full manifestation, but a holographic projection that every survivor could see. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the intricate lines and dimensions of a structure took shape, a communal hall with a vaulted ceiling, sturdy timber framing, and a central hearth large enough to warm the entire space. "This," Liam said, gesturing to the blueprint, "is where we'll gather. Where we'll plan. Where we'll remember that we're not just survivors, we're builders." He focused on the empty space between the foundry and the food stores. The ground there was relatively flat, cleared of debris during earlier expansions. In his mind, he calculated the materials, timber from the stockpile, stone from the quarry they'd established, clay for the hearth. All physically present. All within reach. But to manifest it instantly, to give these people the tangible proof of safety they needed. Liam reached deeper, past the emptiness, to the very foundation of the Blueprint of Conquest. The system had rules, magical energy fueled instant manifestation. But there were echoes. Residual patterns from previous constructions. He'd never tried to tap them before, but desperation made engineers inventive. He pushed. A shudder went through him, cold and sharp like diving into winter water. The blueprint in the air solidified, lines turning from light to substance. Timber beams materialized from the stockpile, flying through the air as if carried by invisible hands. Stone blocks lifted from the quarry pile, slotting into place with precise, grinding sounds. The survivors stumbled back as the structure rose before them, not in the slow, deliberate pace of human construction, but in the miraculous, terrifying speed of magical manifestation. Liam's vision blurred at the edges. He tasted copper in his mouth. The system flashed a warning in his mind, energy reserves critical, using emergency reserves. He didn't know he had emergency reserves. The hall took shape, walls first, then roof beams, then the clay hearth forming at the center. Windows appeared with shutters that could be barred. A double doorway wide enough for carts. The entire process took less than 3 minutes, but when it finished, Liam had to brace himself against the platform's railing, his knuckles white. Silence fell over the courtyard. Then Mara stepped forward, her eyes wide. She reached out and touched the newly formed timber of the nearest wall. Solid. Real. "By all the gods," she whispered. "This hall," Liam said, forcing strength into his voice despite the dizziness, "is yours. It's proof that we build. That we create. That we don't just hide behind walls, we make spaces worth protecting." He turned his attention to the rogue players. Their leader met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "And you," he said, addressing her directly. "You came to raid. To take advantage of chaos. She straightened, defiance in her posture. Survival isn't pretty. No, Liam agreed. But there are different ways to survive. He gestured to the newly built hall. Join us. Work for your place. Your skills, raiding, scouting, whatever you have, can be turned to defense. To building. A murmur went through the rogue group. One of them, a younger man with a bandaged arm, whispered something to the leader. She shook her head, then looked back at Liam. And if we say no? Then you leave, Liam said simply. Through the rear gate, into the mist. I won't waste resources guarding prisoners when we need every hand. He saw the calculation in her eyes, weighing the certainty of death in the mist against the uncertainty of joining a settlement under siege. Finally, she nodded once, sharp. I'm Lyra. These are my crew. We'll work. Good. Liam turned back to the main crowd. The descent had quieted, replaced by awe at the manifested hall and the practical absorption of new labor. Garrett, Elara, you're in charge of organizing the hall. Get fires lit, bedding arranged. Everyone works. Everyone contributes. As the survivors began moving, some toward the new structure, others back to their posts, Liam felt the last of his energy reserves gutter out. The system display flickered, emergency reserves depleted, 24-hour recharge cycle initiated. He was truly powerless now, magically speaking. Everything from this point would have to be built the old-fashioned way, with hands and tools and time they might not have. Silas approached from the watchtower, his movements careful around his injured arm. That was risky, he said quietly. Showing off when we're at our weakest. It was necessary, Liam replied, watching as Lyra and her rogues were given tools and assigned to repair crews. Fear spreads faster than any mist. We needed something tangible. And the energy cost? Liam didn't answer. He didn't need to, the exhaustion was plain on his face. They stood together as the afternoon light faded toward dusk. The mist continued its slow, relentless advance, now visibly eating at the outermost wall where patches of stone darkened and crumbled. From beyond the damaged main gate, the sounds of Kale's forces had quieted, regrouping, perhaps, or planning their next move. Then the system alert came. It wasn't a voice, not exactly. More like knowledge appearing fully formed in every player's mind, undeniable as a heartbeat. Liam felt it first as a pressure behind his eyes, then as words etched in light across his vision. Final circle formation in 24 hours. Only one territory may survive. Domain Royale concludes at dawn. Silas sucked in a sharp breath beside him. Across the courtyard, work stopped. Lyra dropped the tool she'd been holding, the clatter loud in the sudden silence. Even the ever-present whisper of the mist seemed to pause, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Liam stared at the words floating in his vision. Only one territory. His eyes went to the walls, to the watchtowers, to the people now looking to him with fresh terror in their eyes. 73 lives. One day. And somewhere out there, Kale and every other surviving player had just received the same message. The true battle hadn't even begun. The morning sun filtered through the mist, casting a sickly yellow light over the walls of Liam's territory. He stood on the central watchtower, his hands gripping the rough-hewn stone railing until his knuckles turned white. The lethal mist lapped against the outermost fortifications like a hungry tide, tendrils of gray vapor eating away at the stone where they touched. Every few minutes, a faint hissing sound accompanied another centimeter of erosion. Liam's mind raced with calculations. 24 hours. The system alert from yesterday still echoed in his thoughts. The final circle would form in exactly one day, and only one territory would survive. His territory. It had to be. He closed his eyes, calling up the Blueprint of Conquest. The familiar interface shimmered before him, but now it felt different, strained, like a muscle pushed beyond its limits. His magical energy reserves read 0, but the emergency reserves he'd tapped for the communal hall had left a faint, almost imperceptible trickle. Less than 0.01%. Enough for visualization, but not manifestation. We need to expand, Liam murmured to himself, his voice lost in the wind. Not just hold. Consume. Below him, the territory stirred. Survivors moved through the narrow streets, Mara directing a group to reinforce the damaged main gate, Silas checking his bandaged arm while organizing the lookouts, Lyra and her former rogue players hauling timber from the communal hall construction site. They worked with a desperate energy, their faces pale but determined. The panic from yesterday had been quelled, but fear still hung in the air like the mist itself. Liam descended the watchtower stairs, his boots echoing on the stone. At the base, he found Corin, the blacksmith, hammering scrap metal into arrowheads. The rhythmic clang-clang-clang filled the courtyard. "How many can you produce in 12 hours?" Liam asked without preamble. Corin wiped sweat from his brow, leaving a dark smudge. "With the scrap we've gathered? Maybe 300. More if we melt down some of the older tools." "Do it," Liam said. "Prioritize broadheads for penetration. We'll need every advantage." He moved through the territory, assessing every structure, every resource pile. The stored timber from the forest raids, the stone quarried from the nearby hills, the metal scavenged from fallen attackers, it all lay in organized piles, but Liam's engineer's eye saw the gaps. The weaknesses. The main gate, though reinforced, still showed cracks from the battering ram. The walls, while thick, weren't designed for the kind of pressure the mist exerted. And the territory's shape, a rough oval, left blind spots where attackers could concentrate their forces. In the communal hall, now mostly complete, Liam gathered his core team. Mara, Silas, Lyra, Finn the scout, and Ilara and Torin from the material gathering team stood around a rough table. Liam spread out a piece of parchment, his hand moving with quick, precise strokes as he sketched. "This is our current layout," he said, drawing the oval walls, the watchtowers at cardinal points, the main gate facing east where Kale's forces still camped. "And this," his charcoal moved again, adding concentric rings inside the oval, "is what we need to become." The design showed 3 layers, an outer ring of reinforced walls with integrated arrow slits, a middle moat fed by redirected groundwater, and an inner keep at the highest point of the territory. The keep would house their most vulnerable, the injured, the children, and serve as a final redoubt. But more importantly, the design pushed outward. The outer ring expanded the territory's footprint by nearly 50%, creating a buffer zone between the walls and the mist. "It's beautiful," Mara whispered, her eyes tracing the lines. "But the energy." "We have no energy," Liam said flatly. "The blueprint shows me what's possible, but manifesting it requires power I don't have. Not until the recharge completes." Silas leaned forward, his violet aura faint but visible around his hands. "What if we don't use your energy alone? The system grants powers based on territory. If we all contribute." Liam shook his head. "The blueprint is my cheat. It doesn't work that way. But," he tapped the parchment, "we can build this manually. Every timber, every stone laid by hand. It won't have the magical reinforcement, but it will be real. And once it's physically constructed, the territory boundary should expand to encompass it." Lyra frowned, her crossbow slung over her shoulder. "You want us to build all this in less than a day? While Kale's forces are still out there?" "We have no choice," Liam said. "The mist is advancing faster than I calculated. Look." He led them outside, pointing to the northeastern wall. A section of stone had crumbled where the mist touched it, leaving a gap the size of a man's head. Through it, they could see the gray vapor swirling, hungry and patient. "The mist doesn't just shrink the safe zone," Liam said, his voice low. "It actively destroys anything outside it. And our walls are becoming the boundary. If we don't push back, they'll eat through us by nightfall." For a moment, no one spoke. The reality settled over them like a physical weight. Then Silas straightened. "I'll take the lookouts and keep watch on Kale's camp. If they move, we'll know." "Good," Liam said. "Mara, organize the labor teams. Everyone works, no exceptions. Lyra, your people know how to move quietly. I want you scavenging anything usable from the no man's land between our walls and the mist. But stay within sight of the watchtowers." "And you?" Ilara asked. Liam looked back at his blueprint. "I'm going to engineer our survival." The work began with a frenzy that bordered on madness. Liam directed teams to the timber piles, showing them how to cut and shape the logs into uniform beams. Others hauled stone from the quarry, their muscles straining under the weight. Corin's forge glowed day and night, producing not just arrowheads but brackets and hinges for the new fortifications. Liam moved among them, his mind split between a dozen tasks. He showed Torin how to calculate the angle for the moat's slope, ensuring it would hold water without collapsing. He helped Finn position the new arrow slits in the outer wall design, creating overlapping fields of fire. Every decision, every measurement, was recorded in the blueprint interface, which glowed faintly in his vision even as his magical energy remained at zero. By midday, the first section of the outer ring began to take shape, a low stone wall rising from the ground just inside the existing perimeter. Liam inspected it, running his hands over the mortar. It was crude compared to what the blueprint could manifest magically, but it was solid. Real. As he worked, he felt the territory respond. A subtle vibration in the ground, like a heartbeat. The blueprint interface flickered, showing the new wall as a faint outline. The territory's boundaries hadn't expanded yet, but they strained against the new construction, testing its reality. Liam. Silas's voice cut through the noise of construction. He approached at a run, his expression grim. Kale's forces are mobilizing. And they're not alone. Liam followed him to the eastern watchtower. Through a spyglass, he saw the warlords' camp in motion. Soldiers formed ranks, their weapons glinting in the pale light. But beyond them, other figures moved through the mist, solitary shapes with auras of various colors. Solo players, drawn by the system's final circle warning. How many? Liam asked. Kale has maybe 60 fighters left after our defenses, Silas said. But the solo players? I count at least 20. Some look like territory hunters. Others I've never seen before. Liam's jaw tightened. The alliance he'd feared was forming. Desperate players, realizing only one territory would survive, were banding together for a final chance. And they would all come here, to the largest remaining safe zone. We need to accelerate, Liam said. The moat, how far along? Half dug, Silas reported. But without your energy to shape it. We'll use the groundwater anyway. Redirect the stream from the north. Liam descended the tower and went to the construction site for the inner keep. The foundation had been laid, a square of heavy stone blocks at the territory's highest point. Mara oversaw a team lifting a timber into place for the first wall. We're running out of time, she said, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. The teams are exhausted. Some are talking about hiding in the communal hall and waiting it out. They can talk, Liam said, his voice hard. But they'll work. Show them the mist. He pointed to the western wall, where another section had begun to crumble. The hissing sound was louder now, constant. The mist pressed inward, its advance measurable in minutes rather than hours. Mara nodded, her expression hardening. She moved among the workers, her voice rising above the noise. Every stone you lay pushes that mist back. Every beam you raise gives us another hour. Work. Liam turned back to his blueprint. The design glowed in his mind, the concentric rings, the keep, the expanded territory. But something was missing. A final piece. He focused, pushing past the fatigue, past the fear. The blueprint responded, showing him not just structures, but connections. Energy flows. The emergency reserves he'd tapped were gone, but the territory itself held power. The stones, the timber, the very ground, all had absorbed traces of magical energy from the blueprint's previous manifestations. It was faint, dispersed, but it was there. Liam closed his eyes, reaching for it. Not to manifest something new, but to awaken what already existed. He visualized the connections, the watchtowers linked by lines of energy, the walls humming with latent power, the territory's heart beating in time with his own. A tremor ran through the ground. Workers stumbled, looking around in alarm. The stones of the newly built outer wall began to glow, a soft, blue light that pulsed once, twice, then steadied. The blueprint interface flashed. Territory expansion initiated. Boundaries recalculating. Liam opened his eyes. The outer wall wasn't just stone and mortar anymore. The blue glow solidified the structure, reinforcing it with the same magical energy that had built the original fortifications. And as he watched, the wall moved. Not much, just a few centimeters. But it pushed outward, away from the territory's center. The mist recoiled, hissing as it retreated from the glowing stone. A clear space opened between the wall and the vapor, maybe half a meter wide. Safe ground. It's working, Liam breathed. All around the perimeter, the same thing happened. The newly constructed sections glowed blue and pushed outward, expanding the territory's footprint. The mist retreated, forced back by the actively growing safe zone. Workers cheered, their exhaustion forgotten for a moment. But the expansion came at a cost. Liam felt it like a physical blow, a draining sensation that started in his chest and spread through his limbs. The blueprint showed his energy reserve still at zero, but now a new meter appeared, territory stability. It read 85%, and was dropping. Every expansion weakens the whole, Liam realized aloud. The energy has to come from somewhere. He looked at the inner keep, still under construction. The foundation stones hadn't glowed. The territory was prioritizing the outer defenses, sacrificing internal stability for immediate expansion. A calculated risk. Liam. Finn's voice this time. The scout pointed east. They're coming. Liam climbed the watchtower again. What he saw made his blood run cold. Kale's forces had joined with the solo players. A heterogeneous army of maybe 80 fighters advanced across the open ground. In the front ranks, Kale himself rode a makeshift chariot, his banner flying. Beside him walked figures Liam recognized, territory hunters with violet auras, rogue players with scavenged armor, even a few survivors who must have decided joining the attack was better than dying in the mist. But worse than their numbers was their formation. They moved not as a disorganized mob, but with purpose. Some carried ladders. Others pushed a new siege engine, a crude catapult built from timber and rope. And at the center, a group of players with glowing hands worked together, their combined energy forming a shimmering shield that advanced before them. They're using their cheats cooperatively, Silas said, appearing beside Liam. I've never seen that before. The system allows it, Liam said, his mind racing. If they share a common goal, destroying us, their powers can combine. The army halted just outside arrow range. Kale stood in his chariot, his voice carrying on the wind. Liam. Builder. Your time ends today. The final circle comes, and only the strongest survive. We will tear down your walls stone by stone. Liam didn't respond. He watched as the enemy forces deployed. The catapult crew loaded it with stones from the quarry. The ladder teams moved to the flanks. The shield bearers advanced, their combined energy forming a dome of shimmering light that would deflect arrows. Below, in the territory, panic began to spread again. Workers dropped their tools, looking to the walls. The expansion had stopped, the blue glow fading from the new constructions as Liam's focus shifted to defense. To your positions. Liam shouted, his voice cutting through the fear. Archers to the watchtowers. Spearmen to the walls. Everyone else, keep building. The keep must be finished. He descended the tower one last time, moving to the central courtyard where the territory's heart beat. The blueprint interface hovered before him, showing everything, the advancing enemy, his own defenses, the mist pressing from all sides, and the timer counting down to the final circle. 18 hours remaining. The design was complete. The concentric rings, the moat now filling with murky water, the inner keep rising stone by stone. It was everything he'd planned. But now it had to hold. Liam took a deep breath, reaching for the last dregs of territory stability. The blueprint responded, not with a grand manifestation, but with 1,000 small adjustments. Arrow slits aligned perfectly. Murder holes opened in the gatehouse. The moat's banks steepened. Outside, Kale raised his sword. The catapult arm swung forward, launching its first stone. The battle for the final circle had begun. The outer wall shuddered under the impact of the enemy catapult, its stones groaning as cracks spiderwebbed across the surface. Liam watched from the inner keep's makeshift command post, a wooden platform overlooking the battlefield. The lethal mist swirled beyond the breach, tendrils of gray vapor seeping through the gap where Kale's forces had concentrated their assault. He could see the combined army moving in, 80 fighters, their cheats glowing with unnatural energy. A shield dome shimmered over their vanguard, deflecting arrows from Finn's archers, while the catapult reloaded with another boulder. Liam's hands tightened on the rough-hewn railing. His magical energy remained at 0%, the blueprint of conquest dormant in his mind, its usual hum of power replaced by a hollow silence. He had designed these defenses with painstaking detail, but without energy to manifest them instantly, they relied on the frantic labor of his people. The outer reinforced wall, built just hours ago, already showed signs of strain. Workers scrambled to shore up the breach with timber and rubble, their faces streaked with sweat and dirt. Mara directed them, her voice hoarse from shouting orders, while Alara and Torin hauled materials from the stockpiles. From the mist, a figure emerged, Warlord Kale, clad in scavenged armor, his eyes fixed on the breach. He raised a curved sword, and his forces surged forward. The shield dome advanced with them, a translucent barrier that flickered with each impact. Liam's thoughts raced. The blueprint of conquest had allowed him to visualize automated ballistae and choke point barriers, but activating them required energy he didn't have. Yet, as he focused, a faint pulse echoed in his mind, the last dregs of emergency reserves, buried deep. He hadn't tapped them during the communal hall's creation, saving them for this moment. Now, Liam muttered, channeling that sliver of power. Across the outer courtyard, 3 ballistae materialized from blue light, their mechanisms clicking into place. They were crude, built from manifested wood and metal, but functional. As Kale's troops poured through the breach, the ballistae fired automatically, bolts tearing through the shield dome and into the ranks behind. Screams echoed as fighters fell, but the dome held, its glow dimming. Liam felt a sharp pain behind his eyes, the energy depletion hitting him like a physical blow. He staggered, gripping the railing to stay upright. Silas moved through the chaos, his form a blur in the misty air. He had recovered from his arrow graze, his movements precise as he navigated the rubble. Liam had assigned him to target Kale, and now Silas closed in, his curved blade glinting. The territory hunter slipped past a group of solo players, their cheats, flames and ice, clashing in the confined space. The outer wall's expansion had pushed back the mist slightly, creating a narrow corridor where the enemy's formations broke apart. Liam's territory glowed with a soft blue light, the stone reinforcing itself where the mist touched, but the stability meter in his mind's eye dropped to 80%, the cost of active expansion. Kale bellowed orders, rallying his troops around the breach. The catapult launched another boulder, this one smashing into the middle moat's embankment, sending mud and water spraying. Liam activated the choke point barriers, using the last of his energy reserves. Steel barriers rose from the ground at key intersections, funneling the enemy into kill zones where Finn's archers and Corrin's forged weapons waited. The barriers were simple but effective, slowing the advance and forcing Kale's forces to bunch up. Lyra, the integrated rogue leader, led a group of her former raiders in a flanking maneuver, their crossbows picking off stragglers. As the battle raged, Liam's thoughts drifted to the system alert. The final circle would form in less than 24 hours, and his territory was the only one expanding against the mist. He could feel the Domain Royale's rules straining, a pressure in the air like static electricity. The mist recoiled from the walls, its grey tendrils dissolving where the blue glow intensified, but it left behind a corrosive residue that ate at the stone. Workers patched the damage with haste, their hands raw from labor. Silas reached Kale in the heart of the breach. The warlord was surrounded by bodyguards, their cheats forming a protective ring of energy. Silas moved with lethal grace, his blade slicing through one guard's throat before the man could react. Kale turned, his sword meeting Silas's in a shower of sparks. They fought amidst the rubble, the sounds of battle drowning their clash. Liam watched, his breath caught. Silas feinted left, then drove his blade upward, piercing Kale's armor below the ribcage. The warlord gasped, blood bubbling from his lips, and fell to his knees. As he collapsed, his forces faltered, their coordination breaking. With Kale dead, the enemy coalition began to disintegrate. Solo players retreated into the mist, their cheats flickering out. The shield dome vanished, and the catapult was abandoned. Liam's defenders pressed the advantage, driving the remnants back through the breach. The territory's expansion continued, the blue glow spreading like a wave, pushing the mist farther out until it formed a clear boundary, a circle of safety in the shrinking world. Exhausted, Liam leaned against the railing, his vision blurring. The battle was won, but the cost was high. The outer wall was in ruins, the middle moat damaged, and territory stability had dropped to 75%. He could feel the final circle closing, the system's countdown ticking in his mind. As the last enemy fled, the mist receded entirely from his territory, leaving it isolated in a sea of grey. The sky above darkened, and a system message flashed across his vision, its usual crisp text glitching into jagged lines. Error, anomalous entity detected. Final circle formation compromised, ****. The words hung in the air, shimmering with corrupted light. Liam stared, a cold dread settling in his gut. His territory stood alone, untouched by the mist, but the rules of the Domain Royale were breaking. Around him, his people cheered, unaware of the error. Silas wiped his blade clean, his expression unreadable. Mara approached, her eyes wide with relief, but Liam couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The glitch pulsed, a silent warning in the fading light. The mist didn't retreat so much as it dissolved. One moment, the lethal grey fog pressed against Liam's outermost walls, its corrosive touch eating away at stone with a sound like grinding teeth. The next, it simply evaporated. Not in a dramatic rush, but in a slow, almost reluctant thinning, like smoke dissipating in a sudden breeze. Liam stood on the reinforced inner keep's observation platform, his knuckles white where they gripped the rough-hewn railing. Below him, his city-state, his kingdom, sprawled in the sudden, shocking clarity of morning light. For the first time since he'd awakened in this nightmare, he could see to the horizon. And there was nothing. No other structures. No distant campfires. No signs of life beyond his walls. Just an endless, barren landscape of cracked earth and skeletal trees, all the way to where the sky met the ground in a sharp, unforgiving line. The Domain Royale safe zone hadn't just shrunk, it had collapsed entirely, leaving only the territory he'd built with his own hands and the sweat of those who trusted him. A soft gasp beside him made him turn. Mara stood there, her scavenger's instinct still tense for danger, her eyes wide with disbelief. "It's gone," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "All of it. Just, gone." Liam nodded slowly, his mind already working through the implications. The blueprint of conquest hummed in his consciousness, not with the familiar drain of magical energy, that reservoir remained utterly empty, a dry well he couldn't touch, but with something else. A stability. A solidity. As if the territory itself had settled into its final form, no longer fighting against the game's rules but existing outside them. He descended the stone steps, his boots echoing in the sudden silence. The sounds of battle had ceased minutes ago, replaced by the ragged breathing of survivors and the occasional clatter of dropped weapons. Now even those faded, swallowed by the enormity of what they were witnessing. In the central courtyard, the survivors gathered. Not just his original followers, Mara, Elara, Torin, Finn, Corrin, but the integrated rogue players led by Lyra, and the solo player Silas who turned assassin for their cause. Their faces were smeared with dirt and blood, their clothes torn, but their eyes held a shared, dawning realization. They'd survived. Not just the battle. Not just Kael's forces. They'd survived the game itself. Liam moved among them, his engineer's mind already cataloging the damage. The outer wall bore a gaping breach where the enemy's cooperative cheats had shattered stone, but even now, workers were already hauling rubble, their movements purposeful rather than panicked. The automated ballistae he'd manifested with his last emergency reserve stood silent on their platforms, their mechanisms still warm from use. The choke point barriers had done their job, narrow corridors of reinforced earth and timber where the enemy advance had been funneled into killing zones. He found Silas kneeling by the body of Warlord Kael. The warlord lay sprawled in the dirt, his elaborate armor stained dark, his eyes staring blankly at the sky that no longer threatened him with mist. Silas wiped his curved blade clean with a methodical motion, his violet aura, usually a faint shimmer around him, completely absent. As if even his enhanced abilities recognized that the hunt was over. "He died believing he was still playing by the rules," Silas said without looking up. His voice was flat, devoid of triumph. He thought territory expansion was just another cheat to exploit. He never understood you were building something that would make the rules irrelevant. Liam didn't answer. He was already visualizing. The blueprint of conquest unfolded in his mind's eye, not as a demand for energy he didn't have, but as a completed schematic waiting for implementation. Paved roads radiating from the town square he'd designed days ago. Proper drainage systems to replace the makeshift trenches. Reinforced housing districts laid out in efficient grids. All of it cost nothing. No magical drain. No stability penalty. The territory had stabilized at 75%, and now it simply accepted the designs as if they were natural extensions of itself. He raised a hand, and the survivors fell silent. Even Lyra's rogue players, usually restless and skeptical, watched him with something approaching awe. "This isn't a safe zone anymore," Liam said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The silence was so complete his words might as well have been carved into stone. Safe zones shrink. They're temporary. They're part of the game. He gestured to the walls around them, to the structures they'd built together. This is permanent. This is a city. And if you're standing inside it right now, you're not a player anymore. You're a citizen. He saw the understanding dawn on their faces. Mara's tight shoulders relaxed for the first time since he'd met her starving in the ruins. Elara and Torin exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from survivalist caution to something like hope. Finn, the scout, actually smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his weary face. "Citizenship means protection," Liam continued. "It means a share of the resources we gather. It means a voice in how we build what comes next. But it also means responsibility. The walls won't maintain themselves. The fields won't plant themselves. The game might be over, but living isn't free. He turned to Corin, the survivor with blacksmith knowledge. Take whoever you need. Start forging tools instead of weapons. Plows. Hammers. Nails. To Lyra, your people know how to move quietly and gather intelligence. I need you to organize scavenging parties. Not for loot. For materials. Stone. Timber. Metal scraps. One by one, he gave orders. Not as a warlord commanding troops, but as an engineer directing a construction project. Because that's what this was, now. The greatest project of his life. As the survivors dispersed to their tasks, some hesitant, most with renewed purpose, Liam walked to the center of what would become the town square. The Blueprint of Conquest showed him exactly where to place the foundation stone. He didn't need to manifest it with magic. He simply pointed to a section of leveled earth, and workers began hauling stones into position, their movements synchronized as if they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. He was overseeing the placement of the third paving stone when the sky changed. It wasn't the mist returning. It was something else entirely. A flicker, like static on an old screen, dancing across the clear blue expanse. Then a hologram materialized, shimmering with unstable light, hovering 100 feet above the highest watchtower. The figure it depicted was humanoid but obscured by a featureless, smooth mask that reflected no light. Its robes were elaborate, woven from what looked like shifting constellations and dark matter. It had no discernible gender, no age, no identifying marks beyond an aura of absolute, chilling authority. Every survivor in the courtyard froze. Tools dropped from nerveless fingers. Conversations died mid-sentence. The masked figure didn't move. It simply hung there, as if observing them from some unimaginable distance. Then it spoke, and its voice wasn't a sound so much as a vibration that resonated in their bones, in the stones of the walls, in the very earth beneath their feet. Domain Royale Termination Protocol, incomplete. The words hung in the air, cold and precise. Anomalous Entity Designation, Liam. Territory Classification, Rolebreakers Enclave. Game Parameters, invalidated. A pause. The figure's mask seemed to tilt slightly, as if studying them with unseen eyes. The game has changed. Another flicker. The hologram stabilized, growing sharper, more real. Prepare for the true masters. Then it vanished. Not fading. Not dissolving. Simply ceasing to exist, leaving behind only the empty sky and a silence so profound Liam could hear his own heartbeat thudding against his ribs. For a long moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Then Mara stepped forward, her scavenger's instincts overriding her fear. What was that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Some new system alert. Another cheat. Liam looked at the sky where the hologram had been. He looked at his walls. At his people. At the Blueprint of Conquest, which now showed not just structures to build, but something new, a faint, pulsing border around their territory, as if marking it on a map much larger than the one they'd just survived. No, he said finally, his voice steady despite the cold dread settling in his stomach. That wasn't the game. That was someone turning the page. He turned back to the half-built town square, to the paving stones waiting to be set. Keep working, he told the survivors. His words weren't a command. They were a promise. Whatever comes next, we'll be ready for it. Because we're not playing anymore. We're building. And as the first stone of the proper road clicked into place, solid and permanent, Liam knew with absolute certainty that the battle they just won was only the beginning. The true masters were coming. And his kingdom would be waiting.